Preparing our stream. I'm going to record onto this computer as well. So now we're live on YouTube, apparently. So I'll just wait for it to go pop up, and then I'll share the link with everyone. All right, there it is. We're live. Welcome, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Hash Church. It's been about a month since we popped one of these off. We are still in Hash Church 3.0, episode 22. I don't know how many we've done so far, but we've got a cool group today with a couple of new folks that haven't been in the room before. So welcome to both Max and Nick.
Thank
awesome
you.
To have you guys here. Yeah, welcome to Skunkman Sam, of course, and Wade Laughter. A couple of OGs in the house. I like it. You got the OGs, you got some new folks. We got to keep, we're all rungs in the ladder after all of the beautiful trichome that we love so much. Johnny fucking B is in the house. How are you doing, Johnny fucking B? There he is, Johnny B. I don't know, man. You bring a smile to my face when I see you.
It's always great to see everybody this morning.
Hell yeah.
Hey, Johnny B.
So I'm moving slowly today because I herniated my disc on Tuesday.
Oh, dude.
I got a large
yesterday?
Huh? Yeah, that's what happened.
When did you do that?
I think it was probably Tuesday or Wednesday because I ended up in the hospital. We're not live yet. I ended up in the hospital on Thursday and Friday, and I'm just like, yeah. So,
how did you
dude, I'm sorry to hear it.
I went for a walk.
Keep in mind, John has broken almost every bone in his body when he fell 30 feet off the scissor lift that he was working on some years ago, shattered like the side of his body, ended up on all the opioids. You guys have all heard the story. So it makes sense that John could go for a walk and absolutely herniate his disc. Funny enough, John, yesterday I was on my electric skateboard with my son in Squamish, ripping around. And I got a little confident and I went up this big bank and I was kind of like halfway through. I was like, what am I doing? I've got my 6-year-old son on the board with me. Well, I bailed pretty good too and sprained my wrist. So I'm just kind of.
You know, this is what happens when we get older. We get a lot more fragile. We have to slow down. And then you look at our, like when we were kids, we're like, yeah. So, you know, the idea is to, when you go for a walk, don't try and walk for 2 hours.
Well, I'll tell you, this Mr. Moxley's salves, I think you met these guys with me before. This is a good product, I gotta say. I have like 20 salves at the house here, and I was rubbing them all over my wrist over the course of the last 2 days, including this non-cannabis one from Sage or Sage, whatever they're called.
Nice.
This is the goods.
Really good to get all these creams and all the stuff they have. I actually have about 6 or 7 in my bathroom. So I have ones from Jerry James. I got MJM creams. I got so many different ones, Buddha bars, all these different creams and bars, and they all have different ingredients. So they actually work different ways. Some got that eucalyptus smell, or they got different fragrances, and just those smells actually help too, right? So I love the creams. When you need them, they're great. But
Johnny B he's getting into the sensory science of cannabis, and that's literally why I invited our 2 newest guests today, Max Montrose, who does the INTERPENING over in Colorado and has amazing books, and I'm going to let him do a little introduction on himself, and then afterwards we'll talk to Nick Ziegler, who I was lucky enough to get introduced to via Jeremy Plumb. And of course, when I first met Jeremy, I just you know, we got right into a whole ton of conversations, went extremely deep down the rabbit hole. And he was like, man, you got to meet my friend Nick. You know, he's like the bubble man of hops. I'm telling you, you got to meet this guy. I was like, oh shit. Well, I want to meet him.
That's high praise.
Funny enough, I just mentioned Jeremy Plumb, and who shows up into the room but Jeremy Plumb. So perfect timing, Jeremy. Your ears must have been burning. I literally just mentioned you and how you introduced me to Nick. And yeah, I guess we really just started, but I want to maybe let Max tell us a little bit about all the things he's been doing for the last few years and introduce himself to Hash Church. I'm sure he's very well known in the cannabis community, but some of the Hash Church people might be new to him. So give it a go, Max. Welcome to Hash Church. We're happy to have you. What have you been up to? Tell us. We want to hear about it.
Thank you so much for having me on Hash Church. I've wanted to be on for a long time, so it's great to be hanging out with all you guys. Um, what's up, everybody? What's up, Hash Church followers? If you guys don't know me, I'm Max Montrose. I started the Trichome Institute. We're a cannabis education company that likes to do the best job we can to mitigate the misinformation that is prolific in our industry and teach people things that we know to be real and true based off of lots of hard work, lots of research. And we have a different approach to cannabis in a variety of different ways. I'm not going to bore you with all of our courses and classes online and all the different stuff we do. I'll tell you more about the sensory stuff, since this is kind of what that show is about. I started a program called INTERPENING, and INTERPENING came out first in 2014. And the idea of INTERPENING is an approach to cannabis from more than an expert level. Simply because it's pretty common that when we meet cannabis experts, they don't necessarily even know a lot of the anatomic features of a cannabis flower, how many different types of trichomes a plant grows and what their different functions are, and so many other things, such as even what's the proper name of those little pistils. Many cannabis experts don't know those things, but further, from an expertise perspective, and more than an expertise, from a sommelier perspective, how can we intimately engage with cannabis flower in a way so intelligent that we can actually gauge where on the spectrum of psychopharmacy, between stimulating to sedative, any domesticated hybrid plant type will fall within, by just engaging it with ourselves. So no strain name, no lab testing. What is the quality of this flower? What is the quality of this product? And how is this product going to make you feel psychotropically? And how would you know that? And so our program utilizes 3 different cranial nerves. And the one that's kind of the coolest is our 5th cranial nerve, which is the trigeminal nerve, which is the largest aspect of interpening methodology, which is our actual ability to organize how and where terpenes accumulate and group within the totality of themselves in the flower, and your ability to actually feel their quantum mechanic vibrations that do vibrate in particular ways. And we actually instruct people how to sense and feel when cannabis is vibrating in more of a stimulating pattern or more of a sedative pattern. And how to kind of analyze the flower in other ways to kind of put it on the spectrum of, what is this? What is this hybrid plant? What are we working with? So that's just a good way to scratch the surface of interpening. And I would love to answer any of your questions and dive deep into it if you'd like.
Dude, I love the sensory science aspect of what you're doing. And I never, I dug down it. I always found it very interesting. We communicated a little bit. I sent you some pictures early on for one of your books that you did. And I love what you're doing, man. I think that I see more and more people sort of taking this new approach. And I think Gangier has started a sort of sommelier type course. You've got yours going. Like, the more that we can get of this and the more we can kind of figure out, like, what is it going to be called, that cannabis sommelier? Because it's going to be a different term, I think, but it's the one we use because we're just at the start of this sort of road. But I literally have to pause, take a quick break, and say what's up to my homie Rick Delisi, who just came into the room. I haven't talked to this guy since his father got let out of prison after, Jesus Christ, Rick, was it 32 years?
Yeah, 32 fucking years. Can you hear me?
Fucking hell, bro. I can hear you so well, man. I've been watching you with your father, with his granddaughter, with the whole family, dude. It's been bringing tears to my eyes.
I knew you were tuned in. I felt your presence, and like, bro, it's just been a fucking whirlwind lately, but it's fucking awesome. And I know you're one of the people it touched a lot.
Dude, well, I remember talk. Oh, yes.
you did so much for it. So it was like you brought me, not alone, but you in the cannabis community put me a lot in the forefront because of my father's situation. And slowly but surely, I got to the people who were necessary to get my father proper advocation. And he was released December 28th this year, thank God. And he's in decent health. We're struggling to get him up and running as a certain factor in the industry in some sense, kind of get a little sort of restitution for him. But everything seems to be going well. And I just got my head up, and I'm super thankful for all the reception. And man, I mean,
well, I'm down for some of that. Bubble Bags wants to support his re-entry. You hook me up on the sidelines, dude, and I'll do whatever I can for that. I'll never forget, that sort of perspective I gave you, and it might have been in Barcelona or Amsterdam one day when we were talking about our old man, and I was telling you how mine died on the motorcycle accident. I said, look, dude, your dad's, he's gone, but he's not gone. You're gonna get him back, and you.
And I didn't remember.
Oh,
I didn't
whoa.
believe it because it had been so long, and I had gone through so many trials and tribulations. So I was like, yeah, that shit's easier said than done. But I didn't give up, and through the network of a great few people, yeah, he's free, and he's now an emancipated human.
You would have got him out sooner, Rich, except for he was in fucking state of Florida prison system.
That was the problem, exactly, Sam. You know the deal.
Absolutely.
So yeah, on that note, I'm gonna have a dab.
Awesome, yeah. It's so good to see you, dude. I wasn't sure if you were gonna have time or be able to come out and whatnot. And I'll be honest, dude. Like, part of me was kind of like, I didn't want to try to be one of those people that were gonna be like, I always just wanted to give you a place to sort of share this story. But once you got out,
you don't have to. I wanted to be more receptive, but it's also like at a certain point, I was so hounded upon the release. But it was like, I think on the 15th day, I just said to my dad, like, dude, I'm not answering another news company. I'm not answering another press call. Because they were like getting to the point that they wanted to do, like, first they did my 21-year-old daughter in a story, then they wanted my 12-year-old. I was like, no. After the 14th day, I said, like, look, everybody's got to leave. My dad was like, no, we got 2 more barbecues with everything. I said, Dad, I can't take it anymore. Like, it's been 14 days of nonstop, like, but it's all worth it in good retrospect. It's just like, I really appreciated just going back this time and having that 2 weeks with him alone. That was groundbreaking for me.
Dude, I can't believe were you 11 years old when your dad got pulled?
Yeah.
So 11. You're 11 years old. He goes to prison. He gets out. Your son is 12 years old.
My daughter's 12 years old.
Your daughter, yeah. Jesus Christ.
I have 3 daughters. I got a 21-year-old, a 12-year-old, and a 2-year-old.
Well, that's right. You're the all girls.
He had never met the 12 and the 2-year-old, but it's all good. They know each other now, and they like each other a lot. So it's fucking cool, bro. It's like, dude, it's weird. You want to hear the weirdest thing? This isn't a good thing, but it runs through my head, kind of shocking. The snitch is dead, and my dad's free.
Wow.
You know what I mean? So, and my dad is lightweight healthy, and the snitch is dead. So it's like, and he died of natural causes. We didn't have to do anything. It's just like, and I'm not saying I'm glad he's dead. That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying.
No, dude, ironic, I get you. I get you. It is, well, it played out the way it was supposed to. I'll be hitting the bull with you as well. And later on, Max, I want to get into a little bit of how you guys look at the different methods of inhaling, and not just the different methods, but also off the different, whether you're inhaling off of, say, silicone carbide, whether you're inhaling off of quartz, whether you're inhaling off of sapphire, all of these different surfaces. And I don't know how deep you've gone into this, Max, but if you haven't, I suggest hooking you up with Brian Schroeder from D-Nail, who seems to be like, all he focuses on is the way the terpenes are preserved or destroyed based on how the surface area holds, retains, and releases heat. And it's a whole other rabbit hole. And I'm sure you've done some experimenting. For me, I got pretty lucky with blue. Yeah, the slurper. I mean, this is kind of a slurper right here.
No,
I
but
got
all those
the
slurpers are
the
great because
original.
they have so much air intake. So the oxygen just pushes the vapor through. Yeah, I got that one too. I like that one a lot.
The blender.
Yeah, I got the blender right here.
That's what's up. That's what's up. So I got all the JP gave me this a long while ago, and I've never used this. And now I'm having a hard time using it because someone told me they sold for like $1,200 US. And I was like, $1,200 US for a banger? That seems fairly extreme. Ewok Glass shipped me out this one. It was a custom 10 milli for my little Dustin Revere
Fucking
here.
dope.
Dude, it's
I love the Revere raindrops.
The first time I smoked this little banger, I just was like, oh, I'll just hit a normal size dab. Dude, I felt like I was in grade 8. I got so high. I not only wanted to run like just wherever, I wanted to run out of my skin. It was that intense. And you guys know I puff a lot.
My first slurpers did the same to me. It was like, everybody was like, have you ever had a terp sub? I was like, yeah, whatever, bro. I've had big dabs. Come on, let's do it. Put a normal dab on it. It was just like, oh, at the end, I was just like, holy shit, this is a whole other level. Anyways,
it's true innovation.
Thanks for welcoming me to Hash Church.
Because that's what.
Yeah.
Did you want me to answer some of those things while you're loading a bowl and taking a dab?
Hell yeah.
Do that. Yes.
So I don't want to disappoint you, but interpening in and of itself has not yet moved into hash and concentrates from an interpening perspective. And the reason for that is the amount of work that needs to be done and that we're doing from a cannabis and sommelier perspective. And so we're still not done developing and learning the flower aspects of cannabis appellation, which is brand new. Cannabis terroir, is it real or not? And who says so? And what is cannabis terroir? And how would you work with it in different capacities? And then within that, what about typicity? And typicity is a term that the cannabis industry doesn't know yet. That's a term from viniculture, where certain wines have tastes that are of that typical unique thing that could only be that one certain thing. So the way that Durban Poison has a flavor and an aroma that is unlike anything else in the world. There's no fruit, there's no flower, there's no perfume, there's no plant, there's nothing in the world that smells like Durban Poison. And it has and retains that unique flavor sense, so much so that it's a unique characteristic that's recognizable. Well, how do you call that? What is that? That is its typicity. And so our ability to certify OG genetics. If you go to a dispensary and you're selling Jack Herrera, it better damn smell and be in Jack Herrera. But how do you do that with cannabis morphology? And how do you do that with a black market culture that has said, hey, dude, I got Jack Herrera just so that
Florida
you buy
needs that so bad.
Right. And so this is what we're working on is actually being able to certify the typicity of these OG genetics and these OG varietals to give them the truth in the marketplace that they deserve. And so our work with just flower alone is megalithic, right? And we're also working on apps to basically build what Leafly always wishes it was, which is an actual application where if you said, you know what, I want to look for cannabis in a way where I'm going to shop for a particular feeling, which might not come from a strain name or a lab test. And so our ability to use interpening methodology and also extremely sophisticated lab work, we're partnered with guys who actually built a cannabis aroma supercomputer. And they're visually seeing in 3-dimensional gas chromatography the full scope of terpenes, well over 100 terpene types in individual flowers, but also their alcohols and their thiols and their polyphenols that contribute to this true complexity of where aroma is coming from. Like, a lot of people think that the gas note in cannabis is a terpene. And a lot of people think that that terpene is terpenoline. And what we're finding is that gas is a thiol. And so how do we work with thiols in the way that you guys were just saying? So you're talking about using different bangers for the purposes of terpenes. And you're talking about going down rabbit holes. It's like, all right, well, here's a whole brand new world called flavorants. And how do we operate with the complexity of the flavors and aroma characteristics that cannabis truly has to offer? And these are things that I'm still learning about and I'm still exploring. So, that's kind of where interpening is right now. But we also believe that interpening can and does and deserve to move into the world of concentrates. And that's where I would want help from guys who know concentrates way better than I do. Because I'm a flower dude, just all day. Backyard flowers, just growing in horse shit behind the house, just raw stinky ganja cooking in the sun. That's my jam.
When did you first realize that terpenes were so important?
What's that? When did I realize that terpenes were so important?
Yes.
I'm gonna tell you something. I'm gonna tell you the truth about this. It was when I was buying cannabis as a kid on the black market before there was dispensaries. And when I would smoke certain flowers, they affected me so dramatically in such different ways that I was actually able to stop taking pain medication for my crooked spine, or anxiety medication for my anxiety, or stop taking Adderall as a child just to pay attention in school. Because when I started smoking Island Sweet Skunk and Golden Goat, I just realized I can pay attention because these herbs are stimulants the way that Adderall is a stimulant, except when I take Adderall, I can't eat, I can't sleep, and I'm an asshole. And that's what meth does to you, because it's meth. Adderall is an amphetamine salt. Ritalin is methylphenidate. And they give kids meth as scholastic performance enhancement. It is not medicating a debilitating condition. All right. So I'm basically taking meth pills as a kid just to do better in school because I'm ADD and dyslexic, up until the point I smoked Golden Goat. And I'm like, oh my gosh, I can pay attention when I smoke goat or Island Sweet Skunk, but the side effects are the opposite. I can eat, I can sleep, and I'm in a good mood. And so it changed my fucking life when I found cannabis and how I could take care of myself and stop taking these medications, but only if I could organize and compartmentalize how different flower types affect me in the different ways that it does. And so as a naturalist and as a chronic observer of all things nature, and as a dominant super taster, chemically and genetically, I actually started paying attention to and realizing how and where the terpenes were felt in different parts of the face, way before I knew what terpenes were, and also way before I knew what the trigeminal nerve was, that there are actually nerve endings between your ophthalmic bulb and your maxillary gland of the trigeminal nerve that is a sensory perception cranial nerve. So I didn't know any of that stuff until I kept learning and kept going down the rabbit hole and kept exploring, what is this? What do we have here? Because we've got something here. We can organize cannabis, and the organization works within the inflorescence of the cola structure, its shape context, plus its smell context, and plus where you're feeling the aroma of the smell in different parts of your face. Those are three cranial nerves that we pull together, which is interpening. We're interpreting the terpenes of these flower types to gauge them and put them on these different spectrums. I don't know if you guys have ever seen this, but this is a little cheat sheet I made. And we're actually switching out the leaves for buds. And I can open up the book and show you the book. And actually the weed wheel is kind of a good example too. So instead of saying sativa, because it's not, what it is narrow leaf marijuana. That's what this is. This is a narrow leaf marijuana. And where you feel the smell, what type of smell, what the flower structure looks like that affects your body in certain ways. Here's the gauge of an NLM would physically affect you energetically. Mentally, it's stimulating. Your focus is productive. Your mood is adventurous. Your risk is paranoia. And your activity could be concerts or creative arts. How intoxicated you'll become is dependent on your personal tolerance. And then we go through the spectrum of the 5 effect types of flower with this tool. And then simultaneously, this is a tool that organizes your flower types in its different effect spectrum similarly. And we tell people that the original term or industry term is indica to sativa. But in reality, you're talking about subspecies, and the subspeciation of flower types within the broad to narrow leaf spectrum within the category of marijuana are generally indica subspecies. And so this is really a spectrum between sativa species, subspecies afghanica, indica, variety afghanica, to sativa species, subspecies, indica, variety indica. And so really trying to teach people that it's not indica or sativa, the speciation, subspeciation, and then the varietals thereof are more complex. But anyways, you can open this card up, and we also teach, the quality, poor quality characteristics, as well as all of your positive quality characteristics, what you're smelling from a terpene perspective, and how those terpenes interact with you in your face. So this is just one of our fun little tools that we used part of our little toolkit.
Dude, that's fucking awesome.
Yeah.
That's what I just said. That's awesome.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Sam. I want to hear from Sam.
Years ago, we tried to determine if people could smell more than 1 or 2 terpenes by smelling cannabis, and everybody failed.
Well, I've got a good one for you, Sam. The terpene supercomputer that I'm friends with now, they called bullshit on interpening. They're like, there's no way that you can just smell unlabeled cannabis and categorize the chemistry effect type of it. And so they bought me an airplane ticket, flew me out to their lab in California, where they had previously lab tested 8 different types of cannabis that could not have been more different from each other. One was harvested that week. Another was over a year old. Some were 6 months old. They had hardcore sativas, hardcore indicas. They had OG types where you should have recognized the typicity of a classic genetic. They had just the whole spread. And they're all guys in white lab coats. And then they invited the dispensary owners of LBCA, the Los Angeles dispensary organization. So the OGs who have been having dispensaries in LA probably longer than anybody else in the US, to all watch me do this, to see, like, can this guy actually go about an unlabeled jar of cannabis and tell us everything about its quality, what its plant shape would have looked like, and how its chemical effect is going to be based off of their lab analysis. And jar after jar, I got 7 out of 8. I'm just talking
about the terpene contents. All the other stuff, it sounds much more possible. But terpenes, because an average cannabis variety has 50, 60 different terpenes. And most people can name 1 or 2 from if it's really loud and really dominant, but they can't name any more because it's just too difficult for them, or they don't have the experience.
Yeah, but now we're moving into the future, Sam. See, you're like the fucking base rung on the ladder, dude. Like, we're all like, without you, dude, like none of us would be where we are. That's a fact. But when I listen to Max, it sounds like he's right on the fucking money with shit that you've already done in a more sort of simplistic range. And he's taking it to this like futuristic, like, I'll just say this. I go with my gut, and everything Max just said fucking sounded proper. I'm interested. I like it.
Yeah.
Right on.
And Marcus is definitely something serious in the wine industry. So I always wondered when it would become prevalent in the cannabis industry.
Yeah, and
Yeah,
after Nick talks, because I want to hear from Nick as well. If you'd like, Rick, organizing cannabis as a commodity in selling it and operating at it from a wine and viniculture perspective makes 1,000 times more sense than what we've been doing in our mom's basement for the past 20, 30 years.
But that's what's kind of happened in the past 5 years, is that there's become such a fine knowledge of the preference of which terpenes people want and so forth. At first it was like, yo, if I got some good weed, it's good weed, boom, we're good. Now people want their certain like range of what they want, their gelatos or their OGs or their, whatever kush their preference, or the cookies, or it's just funny to see. But that is the next step with cannabis. I've been feeling it for a while. Just wine was always respected that way once it was brought into and even beer, IPAs, they're really respected in the market of flavors, so cannabis is definitely.
But even just
sure.
Even from a more basic perspective, because what you're talking about is truly complex, but from a way more basic perspective, just imagine this just for a second. A sophisticated wine shopper would never walk into an alcohol store and ask for a variety of grape at a percentage of alcohol for the bottle of wine that they're looking for. That's just fucking ridiculous. People laugh at that idea. They're like, yeah, well, that doesn't even make sense. It's like, exactly, but that's what we do with weed. And it doesn't make sense. Whereas in wine, if you walk into a liquor store and tell the guy, red or white, right? A stimulating type or a sedative type, red, perfect. What country? USA. What region? Northern California. What type of variety?
Max, you are ignoring the Mad Dog 2020 customer base and the old English 800.
Cisco. Everybody who wants Cisco.
He's like, but what about $2 Chuck?
Get a 40.
You know what? That's not the type of customer, and like if you're the kind of customer that does not care, you just want to get high or you just want to get drunk, that's what $2 Chuck is for. And that's what like sacks of cheap flour are for. But that's not the kind of guys we're hanging out with on Hash Church. And I don't think those are the kind of guys that watch Hash Church either. So it's just a different breed. But the point is if we were to compartmentalize cannabis like wine, we're gonna get to a point where we say, hey dude, what are you looking for? Like, man, I'm looking for some skunky, garlicky OG funk that's gonna lay me out but get me thinking. It's like, okay, I got something for you. Regardless of the lab test and regardless of the strain name, like I don't give a fuck what you call it. I know what you're looking for, and I can tell you how good it is, what quality it is, when it was harvested, how ripe it is, and how loud it is from a chemical perspective. And I can offer it to you in a fun, cool, creative way. And I can also make it sound so fucking sexy too. I mean, you're talking about a OG varietal from the Appalachians of the Emerald Triangle within a unique terroir that filters the oceanic air twice a day through the pine trees, giving fresh air on the cannabis types that sit in a fog on top of the mountainside called alpenglow, where it's like in the San Franciscan shale content that's indigenous to the soil that the cannabis farmers are knowledgeable about and grow towards.
Alpenglow farms, man.
It's like, I mean, this is what it means to be a cannabis sommelier. This is it. This is what we're doing. That's it.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
I'm loving this conversation. I want to jump in here for a minute. I came aware of terpenes and their importance from therapeutic point of view because trying to help young people with seizure disorders, and really found that early on, of course, I thought it was cannabinoids, CBD particularly, that seemed to give this benefit that we were seeking. But I came to realize, that terpenes seemed to have an important role. And I'm realizing increasingly, maybe I don't even know that, but I'm wondering, Max, in your exploration on flowers, you started off describing your experience based on therapeutic benefit you personally experienced is what drove your interest. I'd love to hear your thoughts on And again, I'm mostly talking concentrates because none of these kids smoke joints or hit on their dab rig. But we've seen really dramatic differences in benefit for seizure disorder in certain kids with this type of cannabis that has similar cannabinoids as this type of cannabis, but really different results based on cannabinoid test results. And yet we see dramatic difference. So I'm wondering, have you gone any further down that path? And if you haven't, I'd really love to engage with you some more on what little I've learned over the years on that one and explore potential benefit for those kids, because there's still a lot of people out there who seize on a regular basis, and it's always a drag. That's all I have. This is Wade. Thanks.
From a seizure perspective, I think we all know that the key from cannabis is CBD. You know, hands down, cannabidiol. Time and time
CBDV specifically.
Say that.
Cannabidiol variants, so CBDV specifically, it's got much better anti-seizure.
CBDV, yeah, and so maybe, yeah, so maybe Nick would be able to tell you more about it than I would from a therapeutic perspective. I just know from a cannabinoid perspective. What's that? Go ahead.
I have a little item. Wade, I was just thinking about the moment when I believe you've worked with Ida Fu in the seizure disorder population down there. There was a period of time when we first had been hunting through a lot of the type 3s and found Harley Sue. And when Harley Sue showed up, you know, it changed everything. The efficacy went off the chart. A lot of the kids that were not receiving benefit from ACDC were suddenly having, remarkable outcomes. Harley Sue is a terpinolene dominant type 3 plant, and obviously early maturing, beautiful flowers, remarkable floral intensity in addition to the terpinolene intensity, a very complicated aroma profile. There was always speculation that that was contributing some of the element. But the other notion was that that was the first type 3 plant I ever saw in an analytical testing result with CBDV. It had a small quantity. And then I've seen that sort of substantiated that the CBDV contribution had really probably helped boost. But one of the things I think about in the sort of like work that I'm really excited to hear Nick talk more about is as we move towards whole metabolome kind of analysis, as we really talk comprehensively about, you know, all of these analytes, I think the reality is when you have like about 1,000 bioactive compounds interacting in constellations that are, you know, so vastly complicated, it's going to be lifetimes before we can tease out all of the variables from the therapeutic effect basis. And I have just one small idea I'd like to contribute, which is the effect matrix. You know, I'm still seeing companies who are trying to leverage language like what Max is introducing in a sort of early effort in marketing that may, in many cases, sound actually a little bit like deceiving in the sense of being comprehensive or full on. And to be specific, companies that are the most onerous are the ones that are making products that say, this one makes you feel sleepy, this one makes you feel sexy, this one makes you feel stimulated, whatever. It's this is really clouding the airwaves. You know, in this, like here we are at the advent of a new era of unbelievable chemoscape diversity and the possibility of a lot more personalized effects and broad range of therapeutic efficacy. But now we have this massive voice from the industry coming in and says, no, it's much more simple. It's just these few archetypes. And it's like, here's the thing that moves units, that speaks to consumers where they're at, and this whole bullshit. And I'm just like so excited to get to that next level of consequence where we can deal with the effect matrix in a more sophisticated way, which deals with endocannabinoid system tone, which is genetically and influenced by diet. And then we have the, of course, phytochemical inventory. And then we have mindset and setting. But of all of these things, and deliveries have to be added in, dosage is the most important in terms of the overall effect. So this notion that how can we get more complicated and more meaningful with the effect matrix and all of these diverse analytes on the path to like whole metabolome research? I think it's all about titration and observation and journaling and also counseling. It's about having a relationship in that therapeutic practice. And I'm just so excited to talk with you more about that, but wanted to just say a few things there.
Jeremy,
Thank you, Jeremy.
I think that's a really good series of insights. Is my mic better, guys?
You sound great.
Okay, it was pretty echoey earlier. You're just talking about like sort of the integrative approach by linking therapy as well as, you know, close personal observation, and then sharing that with providers or care providers. That's a huge shift in how therapeutics are going now. It's a lot of experimental therapies that are using not only cannabis, but also some of the more psychedelics like ketamine and or psilocybin are really going down this whole person approach to dealing with very complex mental health issues and or physiological issues. And I can name some of the groups. I mean, there's the MAPS Institute, which is doing all the work for psychedelic research. They just secured a ton of funding. But also the Ames Institute in Seattle is one that I work with, and they're really, really good. Dr. Sunil Agarwal and Dr. Giles and Dr. Growald and everybody else who works there is working really, really closely with cannabis and medical cannabis specifically. And they don't just give you a card and send you on your way. You have to participate in this journaling with Osmind and go through this whole process to really figure out what works for you. And what Max is talking about, I think, is really interesting. One of the things that we have run into in the past is when you have enough of a sample size, you start to realize that the effect matrix is far less dependent on the chemotype of the cannabis, but is much more dependent on the individual's cannabinoid network receptors and how they work together. So what may be a feeling that's stimulating and or relaxing at the same sort, so I guess anxiolytic, but it's at the same time stimulating for somebody might induce paranoia and stress in another. And that's much more of a body issue than sort of the chemotype issue, as you would say. Yeah, sorry about that. So I should probably introduce myself. Thanks, Marcus. So my name's Nick Ziegler. I have been on the fringes of the cannabis industry and business for many years, as I'm sure many of us were. And now it's really nice to be able to be invited here, but also to be sort of upfront about it. I kind of sidled into it mostly by working on I started out in beer and in hop research. And so I have been working on things that Max talked about in different arenas. So a lot of sensory science and a lot of flavor analysis and development and modeling of very complex systems and the interactions with people. So how the moiety of what happens in fermentation in beer, and when you dry hop and add all those flavors, how those things change and how people experience them is obviously a very big part of being a brewer. But I've worked in brewing on and off for about 20 years. And I recently moved, or I guess not recently, I guess about 3.5 years ago, moved into hop research. And as many people will know, hops and cannabis are the two closest relatives of each other. In the brewing world, we laughingly discuss in hushed tones enjoying the cousin. It's sort of a running joke. And Jeremy can probably talk. There's a couple podcasts that I used to run with Justin at the Brewing Network. That we talk about a lot of this in detail. But really, the thrust of my work for the last 5 or so years has been trying to figure out what the relationship between the chemicals and the compounds in hops and how that translates into sensory perspectives. And one of the things that we actually, Marcus, can I share my screen for a second? I've got a couple of slides to show you all, if that's okay.
Yeah, let me see if it's set up so that you can. It should. Let me go into my advanced. Oh no, it says only host. So now all participants can share. Who can?
Danger.
Yes.
All right, here. Let me see if I can start this. And how am I going to do this? Let's see. All right, here. So where is it? There we go. Let's see here. So, and I'm just going to. Okay, does that look? Can you see the entire, or can you see the presenter mode, or just the whole slide?
We're good.
Okay, so one of the things I'm just going to sort of back into this, in that hop character is something that has been discussed for realistically hundreds of years, but really has only started to advance, and we've sort of I have a bit of a reputation as a disruptor. I tend to make people's lives a lot more difficult than they have to be by asking the wrong questions at the right time, I think. So we came into hops, and there was this paradigm, and if you all enjoy craft beer, you probably understand this, from way back when the Germans dominated the hop market, and there was only one thing they were worried about, really, and that was bitterness character. And then they started thinking about aromatics, and they were talking about, noble aromatics versus non-noble. So there was just bittering hops, and you had noble hops. And noble hops are like Saaz and Hersbrucke and Mittelfrüh, and all these pretty what we would consider now to be very subtle hops. They don't have a lot they don't have a lot of punch. If you compare, as an example, like say a Czech Saaz or an early German Saaz, it would be between 2 to 3%, 2 to 3.5% alpha acids, and it might be, it will be well under 1% by mass total oil. And that's all the aromatic fractions. And hops, we talk about things differently. We don't, when we talk about oil, we're only talking about the aromatic fraction. Whereas if you look at, say, some more modern varieties like Equinaut or Talus that was just released this year, they can be up to 4 or 5% oil and 18% alpha acids. So it's like comparing the rocket fuel version of the hybrid strains that we get from the best growers today, like Mr. Plumb, to ditchweed that you had to go behind your uncle's house because the hemp farmers let their seed go into the ditches in Kansas in 1974. So a little bit of a different in terms of not only the potency, but the overall character and all. And so things have changed a lot. Relatively recently, in the last 20 years, and this really started with Ken Grossman in Sierra Nevada and starting this crazy thing called dry hopping, which was actually invented, many years ago. But he was making this amazing beer called Sierra Nevada Pale, and that really, for me, kicked off the craft brewing innovation. And it was this shock to the system because people realized that beer could have different flavors and it could taste floral and fruity and piney and resinous and all these beautiful aromatics. So they started thinking about hops in a different way. And so if you look at the diagram here on the right, they tried to, I'm going to minimize this so you all can see this a little better. They started breaking apart the aromas in the noble and the floral and stuff, and started looking at spicy, floral, fruity, citrus, herbal, grassy, earthy, evergreen, so on and so forth. You also get woody in there, and there's a lot more than this. But when you look at this, if you look carefully, you see that all of these traditional hops are sort of generally in one quadrant or one side of the diagram. But then if you look at all of these superscripts, you see it's also floral, it's also fruity, it's also citrus. And so this two-dimensional approach to classifying hops in terms of a spider diagram or how much it is just doesn't work because they're incredibly complicated. You have a couple of major fractions. You've got the polyphenol fraction, which is in what I jokingly call the planty bits. So like the bracteoles, the petals, the stems, so on and so forth. And this all applies to cannabis. And you have the flavonols, flavonothiols, phenolic carbolic acids, other polyphenols, and these are very important for the character of the whole flower. But they will not necessarily carry through into the final product unless you have a long steeping time. So if you're making a beverage with hops or cannabis, you can get some of these into solution. If, however, you're inhaling it, this stuff doesn't last. It gets broken apart and it gets destroyed. When you talk about the aromatics, though, you start seeing a huge amount of variation and complexity that starts to really dominate and describe what the character is. So this is a very incomplete list. We have identified over 1,400 active compounds in terms of flavor active and aromatically active compounds in hops, and the list is growing every year. But one of the things that has frustrated me for a while is that the cannabis industry just talks about terps and terpenes, and actually they are very important, but they're not the end all and be all. Max mentioned thiols, and thiols are sulfur containing compounds in a particular way. But when you talk about some of the things that are really, really important terms for aromatics, all of the diesel-y like fuel characteristics, and Jeremy and I have talked about this. Fuel is actually not a single compound. It's actually a mix of some esters. There's ethyl acetate in there. There's some benzoate and some benzene compounds in there. There's some of the methyl butyl characteristics, but it also works with the pentane thioates and no, I forget the other, hexane thioate. Anyway, it's not just thiols, but thioates and thioesters. So thiols are some of the things that lead to these tropical fruit characteristics. And we've identified some compounds in our hops that you take two hops that on the surface have the almost identical terpene profile. So they have the same level of myrcene, which is going to be about 65% of the total hop oil. You've got limonene, linalool, geraniol, humulene, caryophyllene, farnesene. Farnesene is actually kind of rare. But all those we call them the big seven, but those big seven together are about 97 to 99% biomass of the hop oil fraction, of the aromatic fraction. However, if you have two hops that are identical on that sort of traditional profile, and then you run them through a more detailed analysis using some really fun tools like a gas chromatograph with quantified time of flight, mass spectrometry, and sulfur chemoluminescence, you can start finding these other compounds, these other peaks that are not labeled in the industry standard. We found one that was a differentiator between a hop called Sabro and a hop called Mosaic. And anybody in the industry would tell you that those two things smell very, very differently. But when we did the analysis, the big seven were, for all intents and purposes, the same, but they smelled completely different. The one peak that we found that was really, really responsible for the difference in these things, because they smell completely different, was at 0.0001 parts per trillion. Okay, so we're not even talking about percent. We're not even talking about parts per million. We're not talking about parts per billion. We're talking about parts per quadrillion. So it's tiny fractions that make this huge difference in how you experience the aroma of the hop. And that to me is really exciting, because nobody else bothered, because they figured it can't be that important. But as Max will probably tell you, and a lot of you know, is that very small tweaks to the chemical balance makes things smell and taste very, very different. So it's really exciting, and we're really excited to be able to start digging into this. The problem is that our industry, in terms of hops, and I see this as well in cannabis, has a lot of baggage in terms of how people talk about things. So there's a lot of the traditional ways of discussing flavors and aromatics. And what ends up happening is that people try to fit what they're experiencing into pre-made boxes. It's like the IKEA version of decorating an apartment. It's cheap and easy, but not always the best thing for your comfort and quality. So what we've had to do is build, and I've been very, very lucky and feel very privileged by the board and the company giving me the resources and allowing me to build a team to create a system where we basically characterize our hops using sensory and create a sensory lexicon that we all agree to use. And this is very, very important. So when we discuss things like citrusy or woody or musty, those are pretty broad strokes, and they depend very much on your personal experience of those terms. So for example, if I say citrusy, my experience is going to be different from Rick's. Rick, you live in Florida, correct?
Me? I'm living in Amsterdam.
Oh, you live in Amsterdam. Okay.
Yeah, but definitely citrus. Got you. I'm with you.
So
someone definitely be different.
Someone from Florida or Georgia is going to experience, when you say citrus, they're probably going to go straight to oranges. You talk to somebody who is in the Amalfi Coast of Italy or in northern Spain, they might start thinking about lemons. You talk to somebody in the Philippines, they're going to think calamansi or calamondin.
Yeah.
If you're in Japan, they're going to go yuzu. And yes, those are all citrusy, but they are very, very distinct aromatics and flavors, and they all share a lot of overlap, but there's very distinct things. So when we start talking about sensory descriptions, we need to agree on a term and say, okay, even though when you smell this, this evokes memories of pancit with calamansi in the Philippines because you grew up there, like I did, we're going to use this one term to call it that. And so you have to convert your brain and remember what you're smelling, and so that we're all using the same term, and then we can assign a number to it, to its intensity and its duration, and so on and so forth. Creating a shared lexicon is the first thing you need to do for a good sensory program. Then you can start looking at taking notes on it and adding to that. So when I say it's citrusy, but I detect notes of tangerine, mandarin, and navel oranges, as opposed to, say, yuzu or grapefruit or what have you, you can add qualifiers to it and basically increase the resolution of your data.
Yeah, I have it with citrus a lot, that sometimes it'll be like fresh citrus or like an older citrus.
Yeah.
You know?
So
like
I
a
call
citrus peel. Yeah.
And you get dried citrus peel, like a curacao orange, which is to me tastes like the wonderful sour pez. I love that stuff.
Yeah. Yes.
Or a grapefruit, for example. If you break down the aroma of a grapefruit, it is holistically it's grapefruit, but it has notes of Sauvignon Blanc, it has notes of lychee, and it has black pepper in it. So if you and that, when you get really experienced in sensory, I find it fun. I find it fun. A lot of my housemates, my wife now, all think it's kind of obnoxious because I'm always just deconstructing smells. But it's really fun. I remember we had a bread and cheese night or meat and cheese night a couple of months ago, and there was this one cheese that had this really distinctive characteristic, and she was like, "What is it? It's like kind of musty, but it's not bad." And I was like, "Oh yeah, that's concrete cellar." And she was like, "How the hell do you do that?" Like, well, it's my job. It smells like a concrete cellar. That's where it was aged in. Anyway, I digress a little bit here. So once you've got the shared lexicon, you can start, I call it, integerizing or enumerating, but you can turn terms into numbers. And that way, what you can do is you can measure the intensity, you can measure the repeatability, you can measure just basically, you can see the difference between samples. But at the same time, it's very important to not ignore the holistic approach, which is, this smells like this, and I get this impression, and it makes me feel this way. That's hugely important, particularly in cannabis. But then once you have numbers on it, you can also take lab data and compare it to that and say, okay, every time it was above a 5, this ratio of compounds was present, or these compounds were present in these quantities. And so a lot of people say, we want to move away from just hardcore lab numbers, or we want to go full sensory. One of the things that I've realized in my career is that neither is the right way to do it. You have to do both, because to really understand the differences between hops or between cannabis strains, or more importantly, not even just strains, but lots. And this is where I'm going to get back to some of the stuff that Max was saying earlier, that you'll see there's a tremendous amount of intra-strain or intra-cultivar variability. And that's something that people need to realize, because cannabis and hops, well, cannabis more so than hops, because cannabis is an annual, hops is a perennial, exhibits a extremely strong G by E, or genetics by environment response. And so depending on how it's grown, depending on what stressors are there, depending on what's around the environment, a clone from one mother will have a serious potential for smelling and tasting completely different, and then probably having different psychotropic effects. And so it's really important to be able to try to measure that and identify that. So we look at, I'm just going to go back through this list here, is we look at characterizing our hops by using sensory and using lab data at the same time. So we take the hops, we smell them, goes into the lab. We run them through an ODP. It's a basic olfactory port where you can smell it as it's going into the GC. So you can actually smell and write down what you smell while the GC is pulling out the peaks, which I think is a really fun and cool tool. You can only do it about once a day because it's pretty intensive, 60 minutes of just sitting there sniffing really intently, and you got to do it fast. But you start to build up things, and we've discovered things by using this technique that we figured out what the peach ester is. and that makes hops smell peachy. And it was a peak that did not show up on our regular GC, so we had to run it through the QTOF to be able to figure out what it was. But anyway, that's fun. But what this does is it allows you to start seeing which compounds are responsible for which aromas on their own, but then also what other compounds are showing up at the same time that mix and interact with your sensome and those other compounds to give you a specific character. So one of the things that we've realized recently is that 3-mercaptohexanol, it's a thiol. It is very, very flavor inactive on its own. However, when you combine it in the right ratio with geraniol, linalool, and some other compounds, it can give you this incredible burst of tropical fruit flavor. In a different ratio, though, it can give you grapefruit, which is really interesting. So a 2 to 3 ratio, I forget which order it is, will give you a Sauvignon Blanc lychee character, whereas a 3 to 2 ratio will give you grapefruit. And that's really interesting to me, because it's not just the parts, because the whole is greater than the sum of them, and it also depends very much on how it works with your experience and your sensory skills and how good your nose is. Then there's the other part of it, which is that people are blind. They get something called anosmia, where you just don't detect it. So I am, for example, I'm extremely sensitive to certain aromatics. In the beer world, it's diacetyl. I'm known for this. It's obnoxious because I tend to pick it up when other people don't even realize it's there, and I hate it. On the other hand, I cannot smell this. There's this cooked onion characteristic, and it's like fried onions. Or caramelized onions, and to some people, and that it's a combination of a couple different things: a thioate, a thiol, and then I think an aliphatic alcohol. I can't detect it in beer. It's like, oh, this is a pleasantly rounded beer. Other people are spitting it out, saying, "This is disgusting. How can you drink that?" And I'm like, well, good for me. But it's really important to realize that people have different blindnesses and sensitivities, and so figuring out what individuals' sensitivities and blindnesses are is very, very important when you're running a sensory program. So you need to be able to have correction factors. So if I say, oh my God, this is the worst smelling diacetyl beer ever, probably take that with a grain of salt and compare it against how sensitive what's my threshold for diacetyl. Whereas one of the guys I work with, if Tommy detects DMS, because he's so insensitive to it, and that's DMS is the Fritos or sort of cooked cream corn smell or cabbagey smell. If he detects it, it's probably very, very strong because he's very not sensitive to it. Anyway, it's very useful to bear in mind that your panelists and your sensory people will have their own innate biases, either from experience or just because they have different anosmias and different sensitivities. There are compounds that work together to create a elevated sensory experience on a higher level of smell or a different smell. And there are compounds that will work against each other. So they will either mute each other or cancel each other out, or in the wrong combination will smell pretty disgusting. So you can get, one of my favorite examples is ethyl butyrate. It's an ester. At the right level, it smells like beautiful tropical fruit. However, once you get over a certain level, it starts to smell like baby vomit and rotting fruit. So it's a really delicate balance. So one of the things that I've been working on with my team, and I'm incredibly grateful for the people that work with me. I've got this amazing organic chemist, and I've got this amazing sensory head and sensory team. We're really trying to make sure that we're capturing everything that makes up a hop, and then also try to capture how people experience that, and then trying to figure out what the numbers are, what are the actual compounds, what are going on, and how do those interact together to be able to provide this sensory experience. It's a tremendous amount of work, but it's really, really powerful in terms of what it's going to allow us to do to describe these things. And these are the same compounds that are in cannabis. Hops, and they have the same genes, they have the same expression. In fact, the entirety of the hops genome is contained within the cannabis genome, which is fun. So we know that those genes are going to be expressing, and they can lead to the same things. And so the exciting thing for me is that there's a lot of cross applicability of this. But one of the things so Max, one of the things that you were saying earlier that I kind of was interesting, but also a little concerned about is the industry's focus on potency, which I think we all agree is not what we really want to focus on. But it's also the sample size for the effects of these compounds. So when you talk about the experiential, the nerves and stuff like that, I don't know anything about the human physiology of it, but I do know how a lot of these aromatics work together to give a aromatic experience to the consumer. And I don't know. I haven't seen enough data on what the impact of those compounds are for, like, sort of pharmacokinetically or psychosomatically, or not psychosomatic. What's the word I'm looking for? Just the psychotropic effects of these things, or the therapeutic effects of these compounds. So I can't speak to that. But I do know from our experience that there's an incredible amount of individual variety and difference between people for the same mix of compounds. And so that's it's something that I think that as an industry, we should really try to focus on to make sure that we are making sensible recommendations, but also to accept the fact that people have different experiences of these. And I think it's exciting. So again, rather than this be a problem, let's use it as a feature. So one of the things that allowed our group to be one of the leading sort of hop sensory groups and hop providers in the industry was that we celebrated the variety between lots, rather than trying to blend them all together and make one true to type Citra, or true type mosaic, or one lot of hops out of all of them, so there was an average. We actually kept them separate and keep them separate and allow brewers to pick and choose what they want, because there's beauty in the variety. There's beauty in the difference, like celebrate the differences between things. At the same time, we also have to be aware that in terms of quality and for customer expectations, that we do need to establish what you call typicity, and we call this true to type character. So it's like, okay, this is an amazing lot of Citra, but it's got 50% more oil than normal. It's way less bitter than normal. And it smells incredibly citrusy, but it's a spike so much in one direction aromatically that we don't feel that it's a good representation of this hop. Now, what's really fun is I now have a field study program where we can say, okay, what the hell happened in that field? Because that's really cool. And we can start to figure out sort of what's going on in the metabolome, what's going on to the impacts from the environment and farm practice to create those differences. And we like to share, we give that back to our growers so that they can decide whether they want to do that again.
So do you mind if I comment?
No, please.
So when I was giving the glorified example of the cannabis sommelier by describing cannabis types with an appellation, a terroir, all these things, and I think Jeremy got concerned by that from a medical patient perspective. I just want to, be very clear that we really have to compartmentalize how massive and how vast the cannabis industry is, and how there's so many different things and levels that we can and are talking about, which all have crossover. What I was describing in that sense was something that can truly help the family farmers who practice agroforestry and regenerative cannabis, who are being threatened by big marijuana. And it's their ability to prove why their cannabis is special in very real ways, similarly to viniculture. Whereas where I live in Colorado, right here, right now, there's no such thing as a cannabis appellation. And there's no way in hell you could even attempt cannabis terroir, because in the state of Colorado, you have to grow all of your flowers indoor by law. It is against the law to grow cannabis outside in Colorado. both retail and medical. The only cannabis you can legally grow outside is hemp. And that even goes for medical marijuana patients themselves. And now, because I don't care too much about the law, and I believe that my cannabis grows way better outside than it would inside, I grow my weed outside. But it's not lawful. And so you don't have that here. And so the other thing that we don't have is the system of taking care of patients in such a legitimate and caring way that Jeremy described. Well, that doesn't exist.
It's starting to, though. It is starting.
Okay. When all I'm saying is you know, in California, what Jeremy described sound like Aunt Zelda and her work. If I had a medical patient, a family member, I would want them to not get advice from a bud tender in any just regular old dispensary. I would want them in a program like what you're talking about, because that's what they need. People do need cannabis coaches to explain how vast and complex this stuff is for them. And the reality is, because being a bud tender does not require, in most places, training or certification. You have stoners who are passionate about getting high in the position of a pharmacist helping medical patients select their cannabis as the majority of the situation. So yes, of course, what Jeremy's talking about, what Aunt Zelda does, it does exist, but on such a small scale that how could I help the masses better understand the complexity of cannabis by overcoming the strain name dilemma? So I did a little video, it's on YouTube, where I went secret shopping for Blue Dream in Denver, Colorado. And in an hour, I bought 6 different types of Blue Dream from 4 different dispensaries, brought them back to the office, and I'm showing you that the inflorescence, just the phenotype alone, you can just see this is not the same flower, especially when you smell it and you're like, okay, these are 2 different flowers. But we have medical patients coming in for medicine, and what they're being offered is things via strain name, Blue Dream, and they're not getting what they're needing. And so, just to finish,
the only place I went,
the interpening process and methodology is actually helping patients, because moms who have to shop for cannabis for their kids, who are done listening to untrained and uneducated, uncertified bud tenders who don't know what they're talking about, can actually engage in their senses. The nose knows what the body needs. You are physically attracted. Your physiology is attracted to the medicine that you need, which is how and why we do teach the cannabis experimentation phase, by helping people first compartmentalize the fact that there are really stimulating types. There really are more sedative types, and there's also a spectrum of types in between those. And so if we can help you understand how to intimately engage your flower, even in a dispensary setting where there's no appellation, there's no terroir, typicity doesn't even matter, you just need to buy something that's going to work for you. We're so proud that interpening helps medical patients do that in that way, when they don't have the type of guidance that you're talking about that I wish everyone truly did have. So I just wanted to make sure, I just wanted to make that clear, and also say, Nick, you and I have to hang out, dude. I mean, yeah,
well, so that's kind of where I was going with this. Is that
I have a question for you, Nick.
Sure.
Last one. How many terpenes are found in hops?
Oh God.
Oh, you don't know?
No, I mean it's well, we haven't identified them all, but
the ones that are identified is what we're talking about.
Oh, in the hundreds.
Okay, because cannabis only has 156 have been identified.
That have been identified, but they also don't have access to our database, and that may be something that we can change. But it is. Cannabis will have more than 156.
I was working with Chauvidin Rouge, and they were able to find 2 or 3 new ones that weren't in the cannabis database. They're sent in flavor folks. My one other question is, what kind of analysis were you doing to identify the headspace of these terpenes in hops?
So we have a couple of different tools. We have a pretty sensitive GCMS that allows us to exclude certain sections of the chromatogram, so we can zoom in, so we don't get confounding effects from very high concentrations of compounds like myrcene. It's about 65% or 50 to 60% of the actually 50 to 80% of the oil profile of hops is myrcene, but it's actually not very relevant for beer because it doesn't make it through the process. So we have to exclude that, and so that gives us a bit more resolution, so we can look at the remaining, 30 to 40%.
Are you using GCFID MS?
We use GCFID, ECD for some of the vicinal diketones, and then we have some other sensors as well that are more than FID. But yes, that's one of the tools that we use. I've got
using
4.
SPME?
We use SPME as well. Yes, so I've got SPME, FID,
okay.
ECD, and then we've got the LC systems, so liquid chromatography systems that we use for the polyphenols and the cannabinoids.
Yeah. We've been doing this for 30 years with cannabis, so that's why I was familiar with these.
So yeah, so we're using the Agilent 73 something or other, and we have the it's a SPME type system with the Gerstel twister stir bars, and so it's a sorbent little stir bar that you take the headspace, and then we have a quantified time of flight module on that, as well as a sulfur chemoluminescence detector on that particular one. So we can look up the thiols, thioates.
You guys are slightly more sophisticated than my lab was, but I've been doing it for 30 years.
Today's Flex is brought to you by Nick Ziegler.
No, it's I do not intend this to be a flex. It's more of a
No, I know.
Oh,
Listen,
no,
it was just that shit's on another level, dude.
Way.
I'm just saying. we appreciate you.
I have a question for
profoundly.
you.
Oh, sorry. May I very quickly make a comment there?
Yeah, go ahead.
I just want to appreciate the range of instrumentation Nick just described, and that, ultimately when we're looking at compliance testing or the kinds of aroma testing that we have in cannabis, I want to point out the clear distinction between that level of rigor, other than, Sam, what you have been involved with for so long and others. But really quickly, I just wanted to celebrate Nick being here. This actually comes through a chain of conversations, which actually started with Rob Clark. Rob and Mojave were talking passionately about hops long time ago. And we started reading all kinds of folks in the hop space and having these great conversations. And then eventually, there's this amazing man, Nick, who's showing up in all these podcasts and who has the most informed, mind-blowing, absolutely precision-oriented sensory at scale. And it's just, I want to celebrate that anybody who hasn't had a chance to hear Nick and all of the other forums that he's been airing this kind of content, it is just a series of epiphanies and trying to understand some of the mysteries in the aroma conversation around cannabis. So to me, Marcus, that you facilitated this today is just such an awesome deal. Like, I literally think when you bring a Nick into our space, it's like the entire space moves in a really healthy way, much like Max and all of the efforts you've been doing to really build a rigorous approach to sensory and I apologize if earlier there was maybe a misunderstanding. The one thing I really want to reject and push back on is this: we get too codified about particular effects and the correlation to scent. And of course, even if we're looking at monoterpenes, we know that sesquiterpenes have all kinds of truly valid therapeutic contributions, as well as all of the things that we cannot smell. And so while the nose knows certain things, I just think there's a line where when we're talking about therapeutic use and more personalized targeted effects, I personally am concerned about trying to link those at this juncture. There's just so much research and evidence needed to support that kind of stuff. And I think that there's actually a very simple approach to doing what you just said, only exists out here. And it's like, it can happen anywhere cannabis flower exists, with the correct education and meeting patients where they are with the flower that's available. There is a process by which to teach somebody about titration and dosage, the different delivery systems, a very initial sort of perspective about evidence-based pharmacology, and then sort of really support through just gentle counseling and many intervals, somebody who's cannabis naive, a new and lifelong sustainable relationship with this plant that we all love, but not everybody has been able to access. And that's one thing I am really passionate about. But I will also say there's a bunch of evidence that's on the horizon right now. Dr. A.D. Ray is publishing this year the data from the last 2 years of Cultivation Classic. We've talked about this once before, but I think one important part of that evidence is that we see absolutely no correlation whatsoever in what is, I believe, the most rigorous at-scale study of contemporary products in this market with a lot of scientists on the back end between specific terpene dominance and effects, which is one thing that we see a lot of people running with. Of course, I talked with Ethan frequently about these themes. He actually has a new bit of research from Johns Hopkins last year that was about limonene dominance actually correlating with positive mood inducement and things. But in any case, it's almost that I just feel right now, it's enough to simply move into a maturity around sensory science in the space. And that's a massive contribution and just like a mind-blowing set of implications. And as you said, Max, eloquently, it's like, there's no better way to support the craft farmer that I can find at this moment to truly differentiate the novel output of something that has like intricate and nuanced and special sort of aroma contribution and aroma therapeutic potential. But I'm excited to kind of also simultaneously with the kind of rigor that Nick is describing an analytical process, and then that correlating with human health and sort of clinical research, be able to advance that other side of the conversation in a mature way. I'm frustrated with the industry at this point because, God, it was 7 years ago. I set up a similar system to what you described at Pharma with, there was stimulating properties and there was sedative properties. And I tell you, I don't buy it anymore. I've seen too many contrary examples. It's too much individual basis that is involved to be able to extrapolate in that way, despite the elegance of and simplicity of that notion.
Jeremy,
yes,
I would like to say that when we did blind testing, double blind testing with 12 subjects, they were all pretty much in agreement on what kind of an effect it was creating. We were dosing pure 100% pure THC, 25 milligrams, with just a spike of a single monoterpene, and everybody was in agreement. But we were doing it strictly recreational. We were not focused on medical at all.
And I also
we've had hundreds of judges with lots of flower samples, and I think the process you just described is a way more refined and easy way to look at the effect of a particular compound. But we've just looked at the products that are in the market, and gosh, it's just amazing. Like, we see a real incredible scatter plot and the kinds of effects described. However, here's one very important data point. The most important takeaway probably from a human enjoyment perspective when double blinded and going through this sort of random experience which AD led for years, it was that actually aroma intensity was the single greatest factor for user enjoyment. Mm-hmm. And so aroma diversity and aroma intensity must be characterized. It's just such a vital task. So I'm just truly grateful to everybody working on that. And Sam, God knows, we wouldn't be working on that without you, and also without Ethan and Rob and Mojave, who have postulated some new work also in a recent Cannabis Business Times article about archetypal aromatherapeutic categories. And that I truly think, I just hope that we're all getting to celebrate a bit in the riches that gets to spill out from an ecosystem with the kind of instrumentation Nick has, and the real possibilities for us to really shine light on what we all know to be like the most precious expressions of this, and to not let the commodity pressure and immature early stage crazy capitalist scaling of the industry, totally muddy what is actually, this like amazing lineage and tradition of craft output. In any case, I've said a lot.
I love medical cannabis. I'm glad to help with it, but recreational is my interest that's close to my heart. I want to know, how can I create all the different effects and how can I increase their potency, really, to be honest.
So, and Jeremy, I also hope that, or maybe I'll try to explain it in this way. We do not teach that if you smell this smell, it will have this effect. We don't teach that. And a lot of people actually think that we a large premise of interpening is that we teach people how to smell for particular terpene types, and then based off of those smells, assume what the effect will be based off of the research based on those terpenes. And we actually, in our book, we explain how and why that doesn't work, and it can't work that way, and that it's way more complex than that. And an idea I want to give you is how awesome it is that interpening works for people who actually have anosmia, which is something that Nick was talking about, which is the inability to smell. And so people who have lost their first cranial nerve and who cannot even smell these terpenes, they're still accurately able to categorize the generality of cannabis. And so in a general sense, you know, a
Max,
flower.
have you noticed that when you have a heavy head cold, that you don't get as high from your cannabis?
No, but I have noticed that I don't get as high from my cannabis if I'm experiencing fear or being cold. If it's snowing outside and I'm smoking a joint, it is really hard for me to feel that. But
both Rob and I found that, and many of my friends, when I've questioned them, have told me that if they have a heavy head cold and they can't really smell the cannabis, they don't get as high.
I don't know too much about that, but just finishing this quick example that I wanted to for Jeremy, you know, in general, it's really incredible that there's types of cannabis that are really dense from a calyx perspective. And that for whatever reason, these really dense flower types have fewer pistils in both the amount of them and the length of them. So we call it petite pistillate. So these petite inflorescences that are dense, that you feel at the maxillary gland, when you smell it, you feel the smell here, not here. And that if you have the ability to smell without picking out certain terpenes, it kind of smells like leathers or chocolates, tobaccos, or mushrooms. So when you have these deep, dense, rich smell tones with these deep, dense, rich flowers that are really dense with petite pistillate, in general, those herbs affect mostly 9 out of 10 people generally as kind of a sedative, stony effect. And so if we could
quickly,
Max,
I hear you that you're connecting physical morphology again to effect in a way that I personally am uncomfortable with. I totally hear you. I also wasn't sure if you meant bract or calyx, but I really do feel that when you start to make this leap between physical morphology and human clinical perspective, there's just this, it's a bridge too far. That's literally my pushback. If you can illustrate through incredible evidence and substantiate that sort of notion at scale, that would be miraculous. But I've seen evidence to the contrary and feel like it's a mistake to follow that path. There's too much chemical inventory and too many diverse features in the ECS tone of individuals.
Yeah, and
I think,
you know, there's parts in here where we actually show and explain how and why this method on occasion doesn't work. But if we did have the opportunity for me to hang out with Nick and you, Jeremy, and actually the rest of you, if you guys want to come to this party, I would love to set up this demonstration where I would allow you to connect the minuteness of an inflorescence pattern, that flowers that have larger spacing just in the cola, they're just a little bit more fluffy, that have a little bit longer pistillate and a little bit more of it, that generally have citrusy or gassy tones that you generally feel in the higher part of the trigeminal nerve, the olfactory bulb, are generally stimulating herb types. And for people who are really lost in cannabis, who are going by strain name or lab tests that won't tell you an effect type, or aren't privileged enough to be in a network like you who can guide patients, that it is a system that on a daily basis, people from around the world, when they learn it, say, this changed my life because I now have so much more control over my ability to shop for what I'm looking for and actually get it, versus going to a dispensary and saying, I'm looking for Blue Dream. 23% THC and not getting what they're looking for. And so it's a fluidity method. And I can understand if you haven't experienced it firsthand, if you haven't had an opportunity to engage it and bear witness to it and actually try it, that I could really see where you're coming from.
So Max, if I may, it's a funny thing. So, I'm a cultivator, and I've been directing for this last 5-year period a facility called Proof Cultivar. I have done a continuous process of cultivar discovery whenever I'm able to, and we just go through tremendous amounts of diversity. Here's one of the G times E interactions that I'm fascinated with that kind of throws a little wrench into this. Personally, it's if you take, say, a classic Afghani and you have a room full of that, you're going to see a more likely stable aroma profile in that room. However, there's something that's occurring in a kind of chemical resonance similar to, like, say, root exudates or chemical signaling in the root zone. We have chemical signaling in the aerial tissue. And what we're seeing is if I bring a terpinolene dominant variety into that room of Afghanis, suddenly the Afghanis are starting to express terpinolene. Recently, so the facility has gone in these waves. I've been bringing in plants that have a high amount of linalool. There's one plant in particular called peppermint agave. Suddenly, linalool is showing up in all of these other varieties that are grown adjacent to that variety. This kind of that's like one of thousands and thousands in the transcriptome of the kinds of dynamics driving really exotic and unique expressions of chemistry and what is a consistent morphological presentation. Like, I can show you flowers that look very, very similar that have an incredible range when we're looking at analytical R&D results. And so it's just, again, it's that I'm uncomfortable with the notion that physical morphology is going to be substantiated by strong evidence in terms of human effect. That is literally, there's almost nothing that could be said short of really strong evidence at this point in my career after 30 years of cultivation and really using my own efforts to have sensory, very immature early, and now thankfully being exposed to people like you and Nick and many others. Really, Lauren Salazar and New Belgium program was hugely influential. These are the people that are now helping to open the door to a mature evaluation. But again, I just think sensory is its own element, which is amazing and remarkable. But that leap is heroic.
Jeremy, does the Afghan have the synthase to produce terpene or whatever? I forget the compound you said. In other words, the plants have to possess the synthase, otherwise they can't just make it out of nothing.
Exactly. So clearly they have that potential, but it's so amazing, Sam. I tell you, I've grown so many different kinds of Acanica over my life. We all have, I'm sure. I have never seen terpinolene in anything but a tiny, tiny amount, or tiny titer in a classic Afghanica. We're talking like a really squat, compact, early maturing, heavy yielding, gorgeous plant. But so clearly the potential in the synthesis is there, but then through chemical signaling is being evoked. And obviously a lot of controls need to be employed to describe that interaction. I do not have that data in place, but through observation of our chemical analytical output, it's been remarkable to see varieties I've cultivated for years completely changing. Of course, I'm also doing a lot of agronomy trials. Currently at Proof, we have a room with 4 different kinds of sort of inputs for fertilizer and media. We have lots of different photobiology projects underway. Obviously light spectra and intensity is actually as large of a variable as any, but Max, something you said earlier too, I reject also this notion that terroir is not indoors. I understand if we take the classical French terroir and we're speaking really about minerality in the kind of media and substrate the plants are growing in.
And environmental effects and stress.
The environmental effects and stress, even
and farm practice,
things like noble rot and botrytis' influence in the progression of particular aroma. But at the end of the day, I'm absolutely manipulating. I have 16 different environments where I can really create different kind of media types, different mineral inputs, different biology inputs, and different structure, as well as different irrigation practices, different VPD points, different sort of gas exchange points, and overall controlled environment strategy that very much can evoke a range of G times E, or I like this other word, phenotypic plasticity. That the cannabis is so remarkably plastic in the sense that these tiny, tiny changes result in significant differences in the chemical inventory. It was really like almost 9 years ago now when I first gave the exact same cutting to 4 growers in Portland, and this is way before the grow off and way before I think these conversations were going on. We saw one sample with 28 milligrams per gram of beta-myrcene, another with 0, the same variety, and those are really different effect types. And they looked, I would say, morphologically pretty tight, similar to when you see grow off data. You know, Jake and Sam have published images of the flowers, and there's range in that morphology, but in terms of the effect type, you would see a far greater range in the chemistry. And that's still a fascinating piece to me. So, you know, and I have seen really just mountains of data now. We have so much chemical analytic data, but the problem is we don't have it at the level that Nick does, and then we don't have mature sensory to sort of connect the dots. There's this giant gap that I think you guys are actually working to make happen right now. And Colin, you were interrupted earlier, brother. Sorry to.
So I just wanted to jump in and just say, you know, a lot of the things, you know, the crop steering techniques you're mentioning and the suggested biotransformations of the targeted, you know, terpenes that you're trying to either, you know, you're after, so to speak, or the suggested influence through different varietals in the same room and environment. Do you think, you know, just in general, a lot of the controls play a major role just environmentally? Also, I'm finding root zone temperatures are playing a major role in how expressions are really, truly coming out, and that's an area that was really kind of just not talked about for the longest time in our world. But, you know, going back to what Nick was touching on, it's so important to touch on every, you know, little bit of flavor and intent here. And, you know, I agree with you, Jeremy. I think that we've gone really far into try to humanize all of this. And we're like, yeah, we got to put our thumb on that and understand it. But there are certain things we have to remind ourselves that it gets dangerous, and we have to find great ways to articulate the massive hexagon and rubus, you know, that this actually is, and all the different touch points that we, you know, Nick, you know, you beautifully said this, and I think, you know, Jeremy, I don't want to go harping on it again, but you eloquently kind of explained how important the information truly is at mass. Like we talk about very compartmentalized things in terms of the flavor and effect. And, you know, we're in that sweet spot where we have people like Nick. I'm doing similar research as Nick right now, and I have been for quite some time. So I find his work, you know, I want to spend a day with you or a weekend if we can, and just talk, you know, and you know, it's what I'm trying to say is I think that it's really great that we're able to talk about these things. I think, Max, you have an incredible perspective on education. You know, Jeremy's got a different angle and a different eye for science and cultivation. So I think together, you know, talking about this dialogue is really, you know, what's needed. But, you know, the articulation of all this is really important right now. And that's the most important thing, is just laying it on the table. So. Yeah, I really love what you're doing, man. And I love what you're doing, Nick, and I love everyone in this room. So I think it's exciting. You know, I don't get enough of this conversation, and always thanks to Marcus, right?
So that I appreciate that, and I appreciate this really awesome dialogue as well. This is really fantastic. Jeremy, my analogy for what you were describing, I call it middle school girl syndrome. Like, I don't know why they all want to be the same, but but if you take one you know, new girl, she goes to a new school, right? So you just take one cultivar type and put her in a room full of other cultivar types, how and why they seem to assimilate and try to strive to be like each other and share each other's characteristics is a very real and true, bizarre, fantastic, and complex cannabis thing that deserves celebration, right?
It's not restricted to cannabis at all. So it happens in bacteria. It's called quorum sensing, and quorum sensing is now known to happen in plants as well. And so that means that plants can basically sense their environment. And why wouldn't they sense the presence of other phytochemicals, especially when those are the things that attract pollinators, right? And so quorum sensing happens in bacteria, it happens in yeast, happens in cellular organisms. There's no reason to think why it doesn't happen in plants too. And I think that's a manifestation of this. This is called quorum sensing.
Mark,
Certainly happens in people.
That's definitely been proven in trees, particularly old growth forests, relatively recently, I guess about within the last 5 years or so.
Correct.
But
Yeah.
what you just hit on something that I think is really important when we talk about the variance and expression of these things. Is that you mentioned earlier that it's all they all have the genes for these terpenes, for these compounds. It's because of I put a link to a paper earlier on about the how the variation, the phenotypic variation is actually not reflected in the genotype of cannabis. And what's interesting is that they do not have deletes. They're not missing these genes. In fact, I believe the genome is copied over 4 times in cannabis. If that's I may be misspeaking here, but there's a tremendous amount of sort of doubling up or tripling up of these genes. So they've been very, very conserved, and at that point it's extremely difficult to get rid of them because they're conserved so many times, unless you're doing some sort of editing using CRISPR or the recently just discovered Retron methodology by Harvard. But what you're talking about earlier about sort of the phytochemical signaling, what's really interesting to me is that we've seen, I've seen this in cannabis, I've also seen this to some extent in hops, is it's not just for pollinators, but stress response is a huge one. So if you see wind damage, you typically see a different aromatic profile and cannabinoid profile after that. If you get, so this last year gave us some really interesting data from the wildfires. So all that smoke, and so we eliminated any sort of deposition from the smoke. But what we saw was that the THC levels dropped and CBD levels, the ratio changed. So we were actually able to get less destroyed or plants destroyed because of non-compliance in hemp. But we did see that there was a marked change. And the only difference from the cultivation from the year prior, because we have all the data on the farm management, on irrigation, on the water profile and fertilization, PAR and PBFD. I don't have vapor pressure deficit, but that's because they were outdoor. But we saw that the wildfires and it was either the haze or potentially any sort of the air pollutants led to a substantial difference in expression. And when we did account for any pollution of the smoke on the plants, we've seen in hops that if a given vine gets attacked by spider mites, the rest of the field freaks out and it bumps up its beta acid production because they recognize what those are. I really want to see some work on whether it's insect pheromones themselves. There's some new startups doing some really cool work on this in the Bay Area. Or if it's a stem borer or a piercing or sucking insect that attacks the plant, and it's a physiological response, because we see damage, we see similar stress responses from wind damage and and hail. So it's not great for the crops. They don't look very good, but man, do they smell freaking amazing after that. And so what's interesting is whether it's a physical response or a simple phytochemical signaling response. And I think it'd be really interesting.
Nick, are hops wind pollinated or insect pollinated?
They are insect pollinated.
Oh, because cannabis is wind pollinated.
Well, you can get wind pollination for hops, but they're primarily, so the pollen gets carried away. But the way the hop cones are, all of the bracts and all that, they cover, and the petioles, they cover up the glands and they cover up the pistils. Those actually don't come out from underneath it. So it looks like a pine cone that hasn't really fully opened yet.
I don't know about that. I grow a wide variety of hops. I grow a ton of tobacco. I also specialize in psychedelic and psychoactive cacti types. Have hundreds of them. Yeah.
That's for cactus.
Tons of yeah. I don't know if you can see what we got going on over here, but all sorts of stuff. But lots of poison path herbs. And here's the deal. I got little videos on my Instagram, not Trichome Institute Instagram, Max Montrose Instagram, where I show you the flowering structures of my cannabis plants growing next to my hop plants. And when that pistillate is receiving pollen, it does so in an anemophily way, because they are wind pollinated. And you know that because the male hop plant, they are dioecious, its flowers open up downward, the same way cannabis does. And that's to dump pollen from the wind down onto the pistillate, especially allowing the wind to blow it off. And generally, like when I've grown my hops, there's no cone when it's receiving pollen. It looks identical to cannabis in the sense that there's just
okay. Yeah, that's a fair point. You are completely correct. I misspoke on that. We do have some. There are some pollinators, but you're right. From that perspective, it is primarily wind pollinated.
And the other reason you would also know that it's not a wind, that why it is a wind pollinated species, is because both cannabis and hops, from a flower perspective, the reason why they don't grow petals, why they're not colorful, is because they're not attracting birds or bees from that level for the sake of pollination, because they are wind pollinators. They are anemophily. Something interesting that you said, Jeremy, that I think would be a fun conversation is the idea of indoor terroir. And I think what you were talking about, I have to agree with, because what you're talking about is how the environment plays a role on the outcome of the plant. Well, of course, that's going to happen in an indoor or outdoor setting, period.
Sheetrock terpenes.
No questions asked, right? Like, I think we could agree on that one, right? But is that terroir? And to me,
I want to jump in on this one.
Well,
so I'll let you finish, and then
yeah, I'm going to throw one out there, and then I expect this to be a groovy conversation. So when it comes to terroir, for example, Cabernet Sauvignon from the Russian River of California, Sonoma region, has a distinctive typicity. So the taste that is of typical from a Sonoma cab is due exclusively to its environment. So whatever reason that, whatever the mineral content is, whatever the rock content is, however that soil is composed, that particular region of the world causes an environmental effect on the outcome of the wine that you can taste, that's distinctive from all other geographies. So it's a geographic reason why the outcome of the flavor from that type of grape tastes different when you grow the same type of grape somewhere else. And there are, in the world of wine, there are two types of appellation. One is called TRIPS, and the other is called Lisbon. And the TRIPS agreement, to me, makes the most sense for cannabis because it's exclusively based off of describing the cannabis's quality, characteristic, and reputation, all of which you can easily describe a particular type from someone's farm. But the Lisbon agreement is a quality or characteristic that is due exclusively and essentially to its geographic origin. And so from that perspective, when you grow grapes outside, you have a vintage, you have the flavor of the environment that year. And when you produce alcohol in a warehouse and it's distilled, it's a process that you have indoors that isn't affected by the environment.
Okay, I'm going to have to jump in here, Max.
Go ahead, jump on in.
Thank you.
So that's factually incorrect.
Okay.
So I'll go backwards through the distillation argument. Is that barrel aging? If you're doing barrel aging, that is tremendously impacted by the local weather, and it's tremendously impacted by how the oak that you used in the barrels was grown and where it came from, and what sort of stressors, what sort of lignocellulose levels it produced, because that'll lead to the amount of vanillin that comes out of it and some of the oak lactones. So there's a tremendous impact of this. And so when I start criticizing terroir, terroir, if I'm going to be American about it, I do not dispute at all, and I completely support and agree that environment and geography have a tremendous impact on the characteristics, so the secondary, tertiary metabolite profiles of these crops. That's not a question. However, the classic French opinion of terroir is a shitty heuristic. It's a model that is incomplete, and it's from my perspective, with the modern analytical tools that we have, it's kind of a lazy approach. It works, but it works, and because it ignores so many different things, we can explain it better now. So if you look at, when you talk about the Russian River, which shout out to Vinny and his crew down there, and all the lovely wines. There's absolutely a difference between the Yakima Valley and Walla Walla Cabernet Sauvignons from Russian River. However, is it purely due to the environment, the natural environment, the geography and the meteorological environment that they're in, or might there be some differences because the farmers, in order to get the best yields and the best character, have to grow it in a specific way because of those things? So if you look at Bordeaux, right,
which
as an
is
example,
definitely a part of terroir. It's not exclusively to the environment. It's how the environment and the farmer work together to produce something that is recognizable. Yeah,
the farm management,
the
farm management aspect of it is something that has been historically ignored, and the sommeliers and winos, wine geeks I work with a couple of guys and we always get into arguments about this over beer. It's great. But like if you look at Bordeaux, for example, or some of the other classic French regions, there is no appreciable difference in soil types, in drainage and in that region, but there's tremendous variability between the north end of the south end, or how the growers grow it, and that's what leads to the distinction between those things. And so what they've done is they've basically said if it's from this region, you can call it a Bordeaux, right? That's denomination of origin, whatever, DOMS, or however you want to say it. But they've also established upper limits and lower limits for the various characteristics that those wines exhibit to the consumer. They've been doing it for so long, they know they're not going to be well out of range, but there is a range. And when we talk about sort of cannabis variation, your Blue Dream example is a fantastic one, ignoring for the moment the fact that it's very likely that people got different sources or different cuts or different clones or different seeds. Ignoring that, even if they were all from a Blue Dream mother or something like that, we should be working to establish this true to type characteristic, or this typicity. And the way you do that is you say, okay, here is the average results, or here are the results of all the Blue Dream we could find. This is the upper limit for these terpenes and stuff that we discovered. This is the lower limit for these terpenes. This is the upper limit for THC and the other cannabinoids. This is the lower limit. And if it falls within this range, so we typically take the median value, or the mean value. So it's really the median value, and then we will go up to 2 standard deviations outside of that. Any more is too far outside of type to be considered that variety. And so we use that in hops. If you were to look at doing that with cannabis, I think that it could be done similarly. Or the alternative is you don't worry about that true to type. Say, here's the Blue Dream core, but this is a piney expression of it. This is a citrusy expression of it. This is a fruit expression. This is a terpenoline and ocimene heavy expression of it. However you want to do that, but I think it's totally possible for us to create the error bars or the upper limits for that true to type characteristic, while also celebrating variation within it, and like Jeremy was talking about, end up with the indoor terroir or farm management based character paths, character development for individual cultivars. And I think that's
let me
not
ask
necessarily. Go ahead.
Let
Sure.
me ask a question. Yeah. So, and to help the framework of where I'm coming from. So, using Alpenglow farms, which, by the way, they're in my book, they're in my online course. I use them as the example because I love Craig Johnson and his family and the way they grow cannabis. It's the best. They're so true to the earth. They care about sequestering carbon. I mean, the way that Craig is passionate about his soil when he touches it and smells it and shares it with you, and make sure that that's the cannabis he's growing in, not some Fox Farm bag of stuff you could get, right? So in the sense of viniculture, in the sense of growing plants outside, think about that, outside, in the sun, in a region, in Southern Humboldt, with a farmer who understands his terroir and grows towards it. When he produces a variety of cannabis that he came up with called Coyote Blue, and he grows Coyote Blue in this region, in this way, with these environment, and keeps that consistency, that's the true to strain type that I believe you're talking about. And to me, that's cannabis, and it's cannabis with an appellation, with terroir, with typicity. It's recognizable, and it deserves a whole hell of a lot of praise compared to where I live. Because if you take a clone of Craig's Coyote Blue and you give it to a standard dispensary operation in the state of Colorado, they will turn it into a mother, they'll clone it out, and maybe this month they'll use a mixture of cocoa core with vermiculite and perlite and all this other stuff, and then just feed it synthetic nutrients. And it's the same strain, right? It's Coyote Blue, and Coyote Blue is being grown in a warehouse, and not as an agriculture, but as a commodity. And so obviously when you compare the difference of those two flowers, they're gonna be quite different. But from a terroir perspective and what terroir is and means, I believe Craig Johnson has terroir. And I believe the way he's growing cannabis is within a terroir. And I think he can express what that terroir is. I think he can explain it to people. And I think that's what can help make his cannabis special and preserve what he's doing and keep his family farm strong and doing what he's doing. Whereas the Coyote Blue that I would get at the dispensary, that's just, I mean, factory made warehouse weed in Colorado. It's hard for me to say, oh yeah, that's got a terroir to it too. And I'm like, no, it was grown in a certain way. And that certain way does have an output on it, on the final product. But is that what terroir is and means? When terroir, traditionally in the French term and how it affects viniculture, is really particularly based on how the natural native environment plays a vintage role on the plant types versus some.
So Max, I'm going to jump here too. I think you've done a really great service to the classicist definition of terroir. And this is a really important idea that we have orbited in the cannabis space for a long time. And I think you've really done that idea service. Like Nick said earlier, I do agree that we're at a point where we have different tools and capabilities. First off, I don't want to be cast as, I think warehouse weed is good. In general, I just want to share with you that I'm a passionate, like actually the very first regenerative farm award was at the Cultivation Classic that I founded, and then it went to the Emerald Cup, and I've been working extensively with Jesse Dodd and others to support the most meaningful movement in agriculture and outdoor field scale agriculture, and really working with materials in the local region, and just have a huge passion for that. But I'm producing 45 to 50 harvests a year in 16 environments with a huge amount of diverse variables. This is not at all like a warehouse in Colorado. I'll just share, that's a lot of small spaces with different lighting technology, different.
His facility is awesome.
My main focus right now is mineral content in the media. I am so fascinated about the mineral balanced media and the correlation to the development of aroma. I've seen that, for example, I've been doing organic cultivation for a very, very long time, but it's not enough. It's that actually having mineral balanced media is just massive, but there have not been sufficiency targets for the kinds of minerals that drive the best product quality in this space. And that's really changing in these last couple of years. I'm sure you know Soil Doctor. Bryant is absolutely at the vanguard of the understanding about mineral sufficiency and cannabis agronomy, and has built an incredible basis of insight that I would say at this point is about the most mature I've seen. In any case, working with different kinds of mineral sufficiency targets in organic substrates with different cultural practices, harvest timing, light spectra, irrigation frequency, all of these elements, I can produce what is the equivalent of like that Russian River Pinot Noir, which in its typicity is a strawberry profile. But in that Willamette Valley Pinot Noir
Blackberry.
is very much a, yeah, blackberry, or cherry, also cherry and blackberry, kind of both. But you know, it's just that I can achieve all of those voices in a controlled environment. But one other thing I just want to say about controlled environments, because we almost can't even talk about it without recognizing the research that came up from University of Colorado only a month ago that illustrates the unbelievable reckless irresponsibility of carbon in this production environment that we're seeing. You know, it's got a greater carbon footprint than coal in Colorado for indoor cannabis production. And you know, this is a nightmare. This is not a reasonable use of power or energy. So I'm really on the path to what I want is 5 years from now, consistent year-round production environment completely powered by renewables. And I'm hunting for resource use efficiency at the absolute peak of that arc. And I believe anybody who thinks that in 2050, we're going to have somehow this like wonderful amount of like ecological farms that are dealing with the collapse of all of the existing agricultural systems, which are absolutely moving towards, in a really, you know, terrifying trend, complete destabilization. I believe that plant factories with artificial lighting driven by renewables are a very significant part of the mosaic we need to move towards. But there's a little bit of like kind of knee-jerk, well, it's not working well now, but we're not at the apex of our evolution, just like this sensory conversation. But thankfully we're moving in a way that's progressing there. But back to being true to type, what's exciting for me is that I think that just like the beer brewer can achieve so many results in a short period of time and therefore have this unbelievable perversity of aroma and flavor. And I always look to the old wine drinkers that I know who consume alcohol and think, God, you're missing what's happened in beer with the novel voices of barrels and barrel-aged ales coming back and all of the kind of hazies and these wild sort of diverse elements. Comparing it to a vintner, you know, who has a single result a year and in their entire career may produce like 20 or 30 results at best. It's like, I just think that we need to be having this conversation between those poles, because I can produce so many results and then probably discover sooner than later what some of those variables, whether minerals in the media or other cultural practices, that can help to contribute to the overall base of knowledge as we're seeking to optimize ideal expressions of aroma therapeutic attributes. And you know, that's obviously a vast pursuit. It will take tons and tons of us all talking and wrestling and arguing and having fun.
Jeremy, we call that job security in the analytical space. But what you just mentioned in terms of the compounds and the minerality and the you know, I call them sort of metabolic precursors. And so looking at the soil chemistry and the fertigation profiles for any crop is really fascinating, because you can then apply metabolomics and looking at the genes that are being turned on and turned off in response to what is present or absent, because they have different pathways to produce the same result in case if it's metabolically valuable. Plants will synthesize the compound that they need. We do not understand why a lot of these aromatic compounds are synthesized by the plant. They are tertiary metabolites. They're not primary metabolites. They're not starch. They're not a protein. They're not. They have some function because they're expensive to produce. Some of them are byproducts from other cycles, metabolic cycles, or biosynthetic or biochemical cycles. Some of them are seem to be an end result that is quote unquote intentional, like it's conserved for a reason. I would love to find out more about what compounds or what mineral profiles, what minerals are being used in what manner to lead to the synthesis of these compounds. It's something that I'm working on in hops, and like the vintner, we only get one harvest a year, so it's going to take, that's real job security. Whereas with the work that you're doing and the recycling, and it's just I mean, not the recycling, but the cycling through these many iterations is what I would love to be able to get into more detail with, because I have the models roughly sketched out. I have the analytical tools. I just don't have the data yet, and I would just love to be able to collaborate with anybody who's interested in this on creating a system that, if not, sort of governmentally regulated, but at least, voluntarily regulated in the industry, so that we can, we can raise the bar. We can, let's raise the water level. Let's float all the boats. Let's give people access to data and reframe it in a way so that they understand it, so they can make choices that are good for them because of that individual variability and response. And so, what, this is the profile. We call this, I'm going to use the Blue Dream example again, because I think it's a really good one. This is Blue Dream. It can be up to this level or down to this level of these compounds, but you will have a expected level of response, you personally, within that range. So you get to pick, I want a terpinolene dominant version of Blue Dream because I like the cannabinoid profile. The cannabinoid profiles are actually pretty stable, interestingly enough, that I've found within a variety. The aromatic profiles can be all over the place. If you grow it using the same inputs, if you grow it in the same way, in the same place, treating it the same, with expose it to the same stressors or same deprivation of various nutrients or excess, you're going to have pretty good repeatability. Not 100%, but pretty good repeatability. There's no reason that we as a group or as an industry can't come together to try to voluntarily create this result, or this database and this information for people. I think empowering consumers is something that I really believe in, as I like people to be able to make their own choice. Nobody knows what's better for them than the individual themselves. As you said earlier, like, you pick the medication that you are attracted to, or that you're drawn to because it makes you feel better. Let's just be honest. That's why we do this stuff. And be it because of aroma or cannabinoid profile, and for me, it's always both. Like, I would much rather consume something that is aromatically delicious, but maybe less potent in some ways, than have the exact perfect balance of cannabinoids with no character. That's just not how it works for me. And I recognize that. I think that there is something there. I don't have it quantified. I have not seen the data that does quantify it, but there is definitely an interaction between those things. And you, Max, when you were saying earlier, like, looking at the flower structure, I completely agree with Jeremy that I think that's an extremely large leap to make in terms of the pharmacokinetics based on flower structure. However, I also think that people looking at a really dense bud might expect a different level of response or characteristics from that. So they're sort of preempting themselves. In some way, it might be, you could link it to the placebo effect, but it really is that there's a bias of expectation towards something. When I see a really dense nug that's really well trimmed and clearly lovingly handled, I get excited by that, because I'm pretty sure that it's high quality flower in that perspective. Difficult to do with hash unless you can actually tell that it's been properly sifted and cleaned, and it's a really good mix, and it presses well, and you can enjoy it. For me, hash is far less visual and far more on the intake. Like, once I've vaporized it and inhaled it, then I have the experience of it. Whereas flower, I mean, like, we in the brewing industry, we say that the first sip is with your eyes. So physical representation. And on a side note, hazy IPAs, man, there can be great flavor wise. They can also be really muddy. But I spent 18 years of my life trying to figure out how to make hoppy beer clear, and then get it all flipped on its head, and everybody wants everything hazy. It's the same thing with flower. Is that when you can get loose airy bud, or you can, like Dr. Grinspoon, which actually has a fantastic aromatic and cannabinoid profile, but is just crappy flower structure, or interesting at least. Then you also end up with, or you can get this like really super dense nugs that, because the farmer grew them that way or the grower grew them that way and managed them and really took care of the trim and the cure. It's really like, I love that. I love that variability. You know, or the old Mexican brickweed back from way back when. But I think it's worth considering those aspects of how we interact with what's in front of us, and it's not just aroma and smell, but it is also visual. And I think you know, if you're talking about a holistic assessment of how people react to a crop, I think that's worth doing. So.
Can I chime in just
Oh,
because
yes, ma'am.
I had a little bit different perspective than a lot of people here.
Welcome, Debbie.
Hey, good to see you guys. Whoop, whoop, whoop. Oh man. So much I want to say about this, but I've learned a lot. Wow, that's trippy that the plants start taking on the characteristic of the plant next to them. It makes total sense. And that goes all through like the human genome, the plant genome, the planet probably, you know, we're all like replicating to this kind of stable place. And it makes me think, like, spending all this time listening to the drill down. I'm a retailer. I've been street level retailing almost 25 years now. So I know the consumer. I mean, you start talking to the consumer about this stuff and their eyes are going to glaze over. And it's kind of that rule of three. Is it a hot, mild, medium? You know, what's the salsa flavor? Is it small, medium, large? That's how the consumer is thinking. And so while we're talking about capturing the micro language, I think we should also talk about capturing the macro language. What are those three categories that are small, medium, and large in the industry? You know, are there three, right? I put extra large down there too, but I really think that most of my clients are thinking in threes: indica, sativa, hybrid, potent, mild, medium, sleepy, hyped up, or somewhere in between. So I just want to put my 2 cents in. Yeah, what is that? What's the simplicity of the macro that the clients are looking for? And then when I think about the micro, I think it's super interesting because I think that's where the medicine is. And I think that's what we do with the micro. We really we're trying to cure some diseases, right? And we need to really get micro to figure out what's going to really get in there and bust that stuff apart. So I love that idea. And then this whole time I've been thinking about talking about all these stuff about beer. I think about the beer cooler at the store, which is always so cool. But there's really only a couple categories, right? Is it dark beer? Is it IPA? Is it, they've kind of categorized it. And then within there's a lot of genius in there, but the clients are still going for those, take me to the category that I like, that's simple for my brain as a consumer. So that's
we are categorical thinkers, so we like to make it easy.
I would really love to answer Debbie on this because this is my bread and butter, is educating dispensary staff to teach their consumers what's available to them by getting around things that are not real and true, such as indica or sativa. And how do we do that? Because all of these domesticated hybrids are so vast that they're no longer an indica or a sativa. And when it comes to speciation, we're finding that, anyways, that can get too complex. I'm just going to share this with you. A lot of guys on here are familiar with Rob Clark's work. And I think it was brilliant when Rob Clark was compartmentalizing different cannabis types in acronyms. And so he would say BLH for broadleaf hemp, which would be sativa species, subspecies, indica, variety, chinensis. It's a broadleaf hemp type. And within the broad to narrow leaf spectrum, you have a broad to narrow leaf spectrum within marijuana types and within hemp types. And what we cannot do, for the sake of Jeremy and reality, is you can't distinguish a type based on what it looks like, which we do not do. We don't say a narrow leaf type is going to affect you this way. And we don't say a bud that is shaped this way will affect you in that way. It's truly a blend and how they kind of characterize each other together, which is too complex to go over right now. I'm not going to sit here and teach you the complexity of interpreting methodology. I just wanted to let you guys know that that's not what we do. But what we have done is we've gently separated Rob Clark's work by, instead of calling it a drug type, because he was separating a drug type from hemp types. But his work came out the year before hemp had federal legislation that opened up hemp farming for farming it for drug types. And so out here in Colorado, people farm hemp specifically for CBD, or they farm hemp specifically for CBG. And those are drugs. Drugs are medicines. Medicines and drugs are interchangeable. That's why you get medicines from the drugstore. And so you can't call the one that gets you high a drug compared to hemp that you're farming for drug purposes for a variety of different reasons. And after we learned the 500-year-old etymology of the word marijuana and how and why it is a cool, beautiful, and righteous word, not what we thought it was and where it just comes from the 1930s perspective, that we really just compartmentalized that there's a difference between hemp types and hemp varieties and marijuana types. And in the world of marijuana cannabis, we have broadleaf types. So we have broadleaf marijuana that we call BLM. And because it's not just sedative, there's sedative, but there's also types that are a little bit less sedative. We just call it BLMD, broadleaf marijuana dominant. Medium leaf marijuana is the type that's in between. NLMD is narrow leaf marijuana dominant, and then NLM is narrow leaf marijuana. And what we have found is, in general, if you have marijuana types that have very narrow leaves, that generally has a plant shape, and that plant shape has longer spaces in between the nodes, and that longer nodal structure allows the colas to grow out a little bit longer and become a little bit more fluffy and less dense. And that plants that look like that, then also, depending on the aroma perspective and its chemotype, you can start to compartmentalize that. In general, NLMs, narrow leaf marijuana types, for the most part, are generally stimulating types of cannabis. And so you're not calling it a sativa because there's like, you can't really say, well, there's a hardcore sativa and a little bit less of a sativa. So we just respect the fact that cannabis is on a spectrum of effect type, and we just use acronyms to compartmentalize them. And we use acronyms to separate marijuana types from hemp types, as both of those cannabis types have broad to narrow leaf spectrums.
Well,
Max, are you familiar with the work by Carl Hillig?
Yes, I mean, I know quite, I've read his papers before.
Okay, because that's where Rob got the narrow leaf and broadleaf, was from Carl.
Interesting. I did not know that.
Yeah, absolutely true. Carl and Rob are very close friends of mine.
I think for the consumer, we can just even drill down further that they're probably only going to want to know six factors. Is it lightly potent, mildly potent, super potent? Does it make me sleepy in between, or is it like coffee? And I think those are the consumer categories. I don't know what else other than that, they want to drill into those particular categories once they find their crossroad. But
all right, so Debbie, spin the wheel. Which way do you want it to turn? Left, right, and how many turns do you want?
No, I get it. I'm just saying it still is a little bit confusing, but
no, okay.
I'm just kind of putting a big topic on a big picture topic, not not of broad interest, but the consumer, I think, is going to want something more simplified. They already use something more simplified.
You make a super good point, Debbie, actually. Yeah. And this is, this is something we're not thinking about because we go deep down the rabbit hole. But it's, if you ever stood behind a dispensary and just made sales all day, and if you did it for 25 years, the way Debbie did it, you would have like a very unique perspective based on the reality of the customer, the end user, nothing else. And I'm with you, Max. I'm all about no, but let's because I geek out on this stuff. I want everyone to learn this stuff. But when I also go do my PK sessions at Canadian dispensaries for my own company's products, the people who are working there, they're like, oh yeah, I want all this stuff. I want to learn all this stuff. But in reality, when I talk to them, they're like, Dude, I have like 48 seconds with each customer, sometimes 2.5 minutes. They don't want to hear as much of what I've been saying as I thought they might.
And
so that's
this
just
is
a unique. Go ahead.
So Marcus and Debbie, you're both 100% correct in this, and that's something that that while we're going down the rabbit hole, I think that Debbie's, let's make it simple. Like, this is generally stimulating or generally sedating. This is sort of middle of the range, based on the cannabinoid profile. I think that it also, the other thing the consumers do is like, oh, I want a diesely smelling one, or I want a citrusy smelling one, or I want a tropical fruity smelling one. Those, I think, being able to give those labels is really, really important. And if you can assign a simple number, like this is, it's a 5 out of 10 fruity, it's a 7 out of 10 citrusy specifically, and so on and so forth, is a really easy way to do it. And as I was ranting on about how heuristics are a problem earlier, but I use them all the time, and that's how we explain a lot of things in the hop world and in the beer world, and it works for people. And like you said,
Nick,
the classifications.
You've seen the phytofacts, yes?
Yeah.
That's pretty good.
Yeah, and so I think we're heading towards these directions as an industry from a bunch of different sides. And if we all kind of came together, it's pretty useful. It'd be useful for people to be able to see these things and give them a simple tool that we could sort of at least anchor the conversation around. And like here in Washington, for example, we have the move towards the actual, the dominant terpene profiles and all of the cannabinoids that have been detected depending on the methodology, and forget about interlab variants we've seen. But those are really useful tools for me personally. I'm like, oh, I love this smell, but this one doesn't actually make me feel that good. And to try to understand and sort of arm the consumer with, give the retailers and the novice consumer access to simple categories to discuss these things and to sort of frame the conversation. But then as they get more interested or they notice specific effects, they might at least have access to information that allows them to drill a little bit deeper. And this, like when we talk about terms of flower, all the flower characteristics, I think that's fantastic. But this is a hash church discussion, right? I mean, how does that apply to hash and extracts? And those are increasingly popular methods of consumption.
It's actually a sin to smoke marijuana in this church. You can only smoke hashish.
Actually,
can I vaporize
in fact, no matter what you smoke, you're smoking hashish. When you smoke flower, you're just smoking hashish diluted on flour.
It's been diluted by the plant.
It's all hashish. We don't discriminate here.
The volcano
Sam?
It strips it right off the volcano, for example. You put a bud in there and it liberates the resin heads, the trichomes, everything else is left alone, really.
It's true. What a great conversation. I'm glad. I was loving how deep we were getting into it. And I just also loved Debbie just coming in and being like, oh, hey, over here in reality, just had a couple of perspectives. It was good, Debbie. Really, it was. Thank you.
I wanted to.
I like the idea of really doing the science. It's incredible all the work we can do. It's offensive when we think about prohibition. And I mean, we maybe could have cured cancer, all these different things that could have happened with cannabis had we been able to do the research. So thank goodness you guys are doing that. And let's keep drilling down and figuring out what these specific molecular makeups can do to help humans, so.
Well, Jeremy.
Debbie, you can lead a customer to knowledge, but you can't make him think.
I like that.
A lot of people are coming into the dispensaries so they don't have to, right? They're trying to let go of all the complication in life. So even when I go in a dispensary, I got 2 questions. What's the most potent and what's going to make me feel like I'm going downhill on the roller coaster? Like, just guide me right to it. I don't want anything else, I'm connoisseur level. So I like the fact I can just be like, Zam, take me right there.
So Debbie, if I may, there was a wonderful series of experiences when we still have medical in Oregon, where there was very low throughput in the retail experience. And that was a really special time because every individual that came through the door, there would be like an hour minimum conversation engagement, because very often people would present exactly the kind of narrative you said. It's like, which one makes me feel like I'm going down the roller coaster, et cetera. And really, inevitably, it was like, well, let's talk about the effect matrix. Let's talk about phytochemistry and dosage and titration, and these different delivery systems. And then look at all of these novel, exciting products. Now to like induct the individual into the adventure of exploring the nuanced altered states of consciousness and the therapeutic effects that can arise, and to really empower them, I think also requires this other set of knowledge we're not talking about, which is psychopharmacology. There really is this amazing set of data that illustrates, say you prescribe somebody SSRIs for their antidepressant effects, if you simply give them the drugs actually over time for most people are not going to do much for them. It's actually going to generally work to be that you'll see a decreased quality of life over time. However, if you combine those drugs for a brief period of time with counseling and have a little bit of human interaction, then all of a sudden you're engaging in this incredible sort of effect boosting, potentiating result that we see strong evidence to support in the psychopharmacology world. So there's this fascinating sense that I think one of the things that we're missing is we have, you know, this perspective of give me the thing that does this. And now we actually need the, well, it doesn't work like that, but here's this range of things, and dose is going to matter tremendously. So we want you to start with this tiny increment so you can get to know what that is at different times in the day, at different levels of stress that you're experiencing, et cetera. Come to know this one element and then gradually build that until you hit undesirable side effects. And then you know the threshold, at least for now, based on your current tolerance, and then you back off a bit. But that sense of like a mature titration process and the sense of adventure is really, I think, a giant contribution. But then it's this other human element that I don't think it's rocket science. I think it's a bit of empathetic attuning. And it's actually just the sense of being heard as a consumer and then also being supported. And that there's something about that interaction that's such a wonderful opportunity, which largely, as we went from medical to adult use, went away because of massive, you know, volume of transactions and this kind of high throughput model. And then a lot of savvy marketing campaigns saying this product does this, this one does that. And then really this kind of giant cloud of confusion over what has been a movement for decades, you know, from the Bay on, to really help people to actually improve their quality of life, to have a lifelong sustainable relationship with these products, whether it is hash or hash and flower form, which actually was my favorite comment of the whole show today, except anyways, I just think that we have so far to go. And unfortunately, if we go too soon to the overarching categories, we lose a lot. On the other hand, if we spend too long spinning in infinite diversity, we also lose a lot of engagement. And so it's, of course, both are so important. And I just really love the pragmatism of your comment and also have wrestled that a lot. I think almost I'm the worst person to answer what those absolutely essential archetypal categories are going to be or what they look like, because everything I'm doing in my inquiry just illustrates greater range and diversity than I could have imagined possible. And then you bring Nick into the conversation and we're looking at a level of phytochemical inventory that so far surpasses what we've conventionally been talking about. And, you know, including aldehydes, esters, flavonoids, all of these other compounds that are clearly contributing. And, you know, that connect with Dr. David Marie's work that illustrated that, in fact, cannabinoids were not the key variable and why the autistic kids started having incredibly heightened aggression. And, you know, a child throwing his mother through a plate glass window when dose A, which was a 1-to-1 ratio, then gets replaced with dose B, also a 1-to-1 ratio, and radically different effects. And, you know, there's just so much mystery about the effect itself. But I think there are ways to study that. And I don't think that's neatly connecting the dots with phytochemistry at this point. We're immature there clinically. We just simply don't have that maturity. I see the camps that are doing it, and David is certainly out in front, or Didi. But I think there's another approach, which Dr. Adi Ray, I wish she was on this call, because the reality is she has a really wonderful summation of how to approach that human connection to effect and experience based on a really rigorous scientific approach. And I just think that voice isn't at the table. That would be a really fun additional tense and fantastic dynamic to bring forward.
Yeah.
Well, I'm loving the conversation. Go ahead, Debbie.
Sorry, I was just sitting here thinking, okay, people come into the shop and this is what they want to do. They've got a health condition. They want to transform. They feel one way, they want to ingest cannabis, and then they want to feel a different way, right? Better. Or they're coming into the shop because they're like, I'm going to do something. I want to go hiking, and what's going to be the best? I'm going to study what's going to be the best. I want to sleep, what's going to be the best. It's an actual experiential thing that they're asking us about. They're not asking us about the chemicals. They're like, what's best for swimming? You know, what's going to be best for watching a movie? What, you know, I want to connect with my partner.
What's best for swimming?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Oh God.
Where did that even come from? I have no idea.
Like, for real, they're literally asking what's best for swimming. I've had those same comments. But
Yeah,
I always like,
so
I don't know
we're
about you,
talking
Debbie.
molecules, but how do we classify for the consumer? Like, this is the one for swim. I don't know. I'm just saying it's interesting. There's a molecular conversation, and the fact is the consumer is looking for a sensory experience that's transformational.
Yes.
I feel like this, and I want to do this. And where do the two connect? And we could talk for hours, of course, and figure out all these different classification systems. But I think we agree there's not one yet, either on the macro or the micro. And it is a mature market already. I mean, we've been retailing legally, me and ATN, since the 90s, and you know, it is a mature market. Right now, cannabis, sativa, indica, and hybrid are used by our buyers and our staff as a classification for experience. It's not so much what the real plant is. If we call it indica, because we think that's going to be more of a couchy type of cannabis. If we call it sativa, we think it's going to be more uplifting. You know. Anyway, I'm just saying.
I totally understand that, Debbie. People do that. The problem is it just doesn't work, and I really mean that. You know, I get that we've all defaulted to a kind of jargon that is comforting, but the problem is it doesn't work. So I think there is a ways to go. Every time I have the chance, just to make it really, really simple, I simply start with, you know, it just doesn't work like that. There's like over 1,000 bioactive compounds and unique constellations in each one of these lots. And even if you get the same product from the same producer, you're probably not going to see Bedrocan-like trait stability in the chemovar expression. You're actually going to experience a range of things. So embrace the adventure. Here's some tools for the ride. You need to understand titration with all of this. Explore. And the great news is, unless a bale of it falls on your head, it's probably not going to do harm. Although now we actually have to deal with cannabinoid hyperemesis syndrome, which I've just had my second experience with in the last month. And it is absolutely horrifying to see what people go through. It is actually a psychosis that preempts, that is before the cyclical vomiting, which is, it's a really wild experience that is actually legitimately happening to a now significant population of people consuming. Outside of that, the bale of it needs to fucking fall on your head. So it's safe, and therefore enjoy the adventure. Like, let's not actually project immature systems onto the infinite amazing layers and vicissitudes of this relationship between people and plant. Let's rather encourage a passionate exploration and resource with the best science and evidence that we have. And in a limited way, you know, that sort of thing I always get off on.
So when I was a bud tender, and someone would come in asking for an indica or a sativa or what would help them swim, I would do exactly what Jeremy's doing. I would say, but it doesn't work like that. And I would try to explain to them the complexity of the effect matrix and all these things. And then I'd get yelled at by my boss because he's like, dude, I love the fact that you just want to educate each and every individual customer that comes in each time, but you are slowing down my entire operation. I have a line out the door. These people you can't even understand half the shit you're saying. Their eyes are rolling in the back of their head. There's gotta be a meeting in the middle point where all of the stuff that Jeremy's saying, which is 100% real and true, that the consumer doesn't know what they don't know. They don't know what to ask. And sometimes they don't have the time of day to get the type of education that we're so passionate about and want to offer to them. And so that's the reason why I'm trying to develop this app with this aroma science company that does cannabis aroma the way that I think Nick is doing hop aroma in probably very similar ways, and wrapping that in with just a little bit of interpening methodology, but also for the first time grading cannabis. how good is this weed? Am I buying good weed or bad weed? What is good weed? Who sets the line for what good is, and how do you measure that? So at the end of the day, hopefully what we'll be able to do is, if you either are searching for something particular, or you can go into a dispensary that doesn't offer deli style anymore, which is horrible, prepackaged cannabis. You're not allowed to see if your body is attracted to this plant or not. Hopefully you'll be able to scan it with your cell phone, and it's just going to have one page of information that will tell you, on a scale of good to bad, this is how good this product has been graded. And on a scale from stimulating to sedative, this is where a computer based off of aroma profiles have found it to be, which has been corroborated with interpeners, people who are really passionate about the flavor, the aroma, the effect type of cannabis, all together, so that at the end of the day, a consumer doesn't have to know and understand the details of this complexity. They just have to scan a jar of flour and see, okay, these really smart guys who are super passionate cracked the code of what this varietal is, and they just programmed it in a quick information space for me to say, oh, this is a 91.26%. So this is an A- grade cannabis that has really gassy and fruity tones, which generally is going to equate to this type of an effect for 9 out of 10 people. And also, if you want to go even crazier, you can slide over and be like, where's its appellation? What's its terroir? What's the grower story? What's the history? And try to, offer cannabis in that way. But before I have to jet and get out of here, Jeremy, I think, did a good job of celebrating Nick and all of the work that Nick is doing. And after
slightly embarrassingly, but very much thanks. And I'm actually humbled to be invited to speak with all of you all. This has been fantastic.
Well, I just wanted to celebrate what Jeremy's doing, because I think when you described the way that you're going about your version of growing cannabis in a controlled environment with different environments indoors that's replicatable, I believe what you're talking about can and would have a terroir. And so I'm going to make that leap from you can't have indoor terroir to, if you're doing it the way Jeremy is, well then yes, you could definitely apply the ideology of terroir in that way. And you're also pushing a boundary too. Every French person is just yelling at the computer right now, no, you can't do this. This is, it's to the earth, and oh my god, and Frenchy cannoli is screaming in the background, no, you can't do it indoors. But I think I think because you're going about it in such a passionately intelligent way, and the term that you keep referring back to, maturity, I think you're bringing a maturity to the idea of how growing indoor and consistent cannabis could and should be done. And in my geography and where I come from, those guys just aren't there yet, man. They're just trying to pump money, right? They're just shooting pounds. What kind of light lumens can I get for how many pounds? Because at the end of the day, my goal is to make millions of dollars and retire on this weed thing that I love since high school. That's it. It's not the same amount of care. It's not the same amount of passion, and it's not the same amount of maturity. So I just wanted to share with you that I'm proud of the work that you're doing, and I'm very appreciative of it, and that I'd like to learn a lot more about it.
Thank you, my friend.
I can speak to that as well. I was super impressed by Jeremy the first time I met him, and that has only grown. And actually getting to see the facility and sample some of the product that you've created was just a pleasure. And I got to come back next time I'm in Portland, dude. That was fantastic.
Well, I'm honored, and sincerely, a lot of my passion has been informed by other people present on the church right now. And I again want to thank Marcus for facilitating a conversation that includes as many diverse perspectives, and Colin to constantly big up and support that process, and Sam to inspire all of us to be at the foundation, Debbie to keep it real, Etienne to lay down the foundation for the Bay Area activism. Anyways, all of these great humans. But the reality is, I just am also grateful to you, Max, for all of that feedback and for the bold efforts that you've made to essentially, really take a point position and leading sensory forward in our space, knowing how absolutely vital this is to especially the producers I care about the most, who often the people who can show you their soil and how much love and concern that they've put into that, it's like they're not able to get any kind of value at wholesale level at most of the high throughput retail locations right now. And until sensory comes in and validates that, until a critical momentum is achieved where we can actually recognize that all cannabis is not being produced on an equal level. There's tremendous variance in quality. Quality is yet to be identified in a mature way. And this is grinding up people who have been multi-generational farmers who are the very best at this craft. And I'm just so excited to see that reality start to turn. And I think everybody's contributing to that in this discourse. But anyways, just such an awesome honor to be in Hash Church again and here with family, working on challenging issues that will probably outlive us, and that I hope we all get to somehow support and breathe more life into, because gosh, we have a long ways to go.
Well, I have no doubt these conversations are incredibly important, and I didn't really know it when I first started Hash Church, and even after a couple years, and then I looked back 4 or 5 years later, and I had taken some big breaks, and I was like, oh wow, that was really important conversation. And it's how I feel now again, that these conversations are incredibly important. It's great that we're having them, and I thank all of you for showing up and engaging in these dialogues. It's awesome.
Word. Thanks so much, everybody. Great conversation. Thank you, Marcus.
Great meeting you, Max. I'd love to connect with you, talk more. Definitely. Like to talk to you.
And Nick, man, I want to go to Nick's school. Like,
same.
It's a scary place, dude. It's a scary place.
Oh man, like, and I can't wait to tell you guys about the cannabis and hops new species that's been hybridized together at an F7 that I'm writing about in the new interpreting book that's coming out this year.
Really, who did that?
Wait a minute.
He's like, how can you start something like that and then bail? It's
hey, Marcus,
this is a different. How about next Hash Church? We're gonna get into all the funky types of cannabis, like you know that
duck's foot, ABC, and
did you know that duck's foot was first scientifically described in the 1920s? I've got white papers on duck foot.
Oh no, I've got them from the 1800s.
Yeah, exactly. Like this is like, I think you know what, Marcus, next Hash Church will be the most unique and bizarre cannabis varietals and even types that are pushing the boundary of being cannabis and are now moving into cannabis humulus.
I'm definitely feeling a continuation.
Rob and I tried to hybridize hops with cannabis. We tried every hop species we could find, and we crossed it with cannabis, and we did the vice versa. We never got any cross-pollination, fertilization whatsoever.
And I know why. Because there's a trick up someone's sleeve. The guy who did it and who figured it out, there's a trick to it. So
and you've confirmed that it contains both genomes?
Yeah.
Well, there's a bit of a problem with that because the genome's already contained within the cannabis plant.
Right. So anyway, till next Hash Church. this would be a whole nother 3-hour haul. I'm gonna go take care of my
can
dog.
go, bro. What are you talking about? We do 5-hour Hash Churches all the time. I'm just joking. We'll do it next Sunday.
I'm telling you, Max, we tried so hard to do that. I'm not saying it's impossible, but I've never seen it. I've heard at least 100 different people say they could do it. So
I'll tell you the trick.
Very curious.
The trick is to use a species of hops that nobody uses to produce beer with.
Yeah, but we use
a species of hops.
A species of hops. Hops is polytypic, the way cannabis is not.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I definitely need to connect with you on this because this would be really interesting for me from a variety of reasons.
Yeah, and I mean, we also discovered glandular trichomes that have never been scientifically looked at before. So I've got a contract with 2 different universities who have confirmed, both in South Korea and Colorado, that cannabis glandular trichomes that we have found that look unlike any other trichome type are definitely novel. And what they'll this year, when I flower these plants out, they're actually going to dissect the anatomy of the glandular trichomes as they're alive in their living state, which is why they have to do this.
That's been done many times, Max, with lasers. That's already been done.
Right, but not done to novel novel
but not with the
trichomes he's
unique
talking
trichome.
about. There you go. There
Brand
you
new trichome types. But
Hey, Marcus.
I think,
Just a quick question for you here. I'd love to, I sent an email to what I thought was everybody on here, but I think we've got some new late joins that weren't in the original email thread. Is the chat, does that get published as well, or is that private?
The chat here, it does not get published, the Zoom chat, but the one on YouTube does.
Okay, so the Zoom chat's private then, right?
Yep.
So I just shot you my email in the Zoom chat. Oh no, I just shot that to Debbie. Let me shoot it to everybody.
I just hit mine, so hit us up, please.
Yeah.
If you want to connect some more, that'd be great.
Oh, for sure. And when you asked for volunteers to help create a standard for, it sounds like we're trying to create something like IBUs in beer, but for cannabis in a variety of different ways. Anyways, I would love to be on that team and that project and explore those ideas.
Sounds great.
Yeah, Nick, that sounds like a great direction to take everything.
I will bring. I actually have a ton of photographs of the cannabis and hops crosses, and in a variety of different ones too. There's a handful of them, and you'll see these plants. Will be like, oh my gosh, that is a hop plant growing THC and CBD rich cones, and vice versa. Really interesting.
Have you tested the hops with analysis to see what the cannabinoid content was?
Yes, we have done cannabinoid analyses. The thing that we haven't done yet is genealogy. So genome testing is coming next.
Very cool, Max.
Yeah. Hey, you guys rock. Marcus, thank you so much for inviting me to be a part of this hash church. This was a good one, and I'm just so thankful to be with all these really incredible cannabis leaders. Intellectuals. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for coming out, man. We'll definitely try to continue this next week. That was like a solid 3+, almost 3 hours. You guys all went on, and it was great. I really enjoyed it. It was it's always a pleasure to have everyone on the panel and to join. Today was a good one. Today was a good one. This one's gonna be popular in the podcast form, I suspect. So for those that don't feel like watching YouTube, this shows up on Android and Google and Apple and Spotify and Pandora and all those sorts of things, just under Hash Church 3.0. And I'll be uploading it today at the end of this episode, which I suspect I'll let it go for another 12 minutes. We can keep chatting a little bit and maybe
Nick,
one more rip.
Hops are heterozygote, correct?
Dioecious heterozygous. Yeah, I think so. I think so. I'm just I haven't eaten breakfast yet. My brain's a little bit slow.
All cannabis is heterozygote.
Yeah.
I'm just trying to understand how hops can cross with cannabis. I mean, I did the same thing. Rob and I spent several years trying to do it. We got every species of hops there was in the entire world. The rarest ones were from China, but we could never get them to hybridize.
The Unionensis has actually been disproven as a species. We're pretty sure that
we got it anyway.
Yeah, you probably got the Tsingtao flower. Hops are they've got a high level of heterozygosity, and a lot of repeats as well. So, but it's interesting. The people have tried. People have had limited success, and they've been able to cross them, and then they tend to die before the fourth internode starts to.
I've seen people graft them. I grafted them.
No. I mean, the grafting works, but then actually even hybridizing them, they have been able to get pollen to stick, and then it dies quickly.
Yeah. We could not get any set seed.
Yeah.
Either on the hops or on the cannabis, vice versa, because we did it both ways.
One totally different idea here that's parallel. I'm sure you're aware of a type 5 cannabis variety. So now we have a knockout that's in the synthesis resulting in cannabinoid null profile. These aroma-rich cannabis products being used for dry hop addition or dry hemp addition strikes me as offering a whole novel array of aroma contributions on the ale side. On the cannabis side, a little bit, different, but interesting. I have yet to see type 5 plants actually being used in that way, but it sure seems like a novel and fun application as well. It's like cannabinoid-free concentrates.
Those were described by Dr. DeMeyer.
Right.
That was our work.
I recall. Thank you for reminding me some of those amazing work. And ultimately, I can't wait till I get to play with some of those type 5 plants. I've never, ever found one in any of the sessions I've hunted, and always hoped that somewhere in a type 3 population, I'd run into that. But
well,
at least we have lots of type 4s now. Oh, sorry, what was that?
It's a mutation.
Yes.
A natural mutation.
Hey, everyone. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you, and Jeremy, always a pleasure. And Marcus, thank you so much for setting this up. It's this is just a fantastic privilege. So I hope we can do it again, and I'd love to connect. You guys put my email in the chat, and I sent an email to those who were on the original chain. But please reach out if you'd like to discuss anything further, and I will definitely be reaching out to some of you guys. So thank you all so much.
I have a strong feeling you're going to get about a dozen emails.
Awesome. Great. New people talking about fun things that I care about. This is fantastic. I mean, what's not to like? So
yeah, thanks for showing up, Nick. It was indeed a pleasure. Thanks, Jeremy, for linking me up to Nick. And
thanks, Rob, for
anyone that ever wants to
Nick. Sorry.
Well, anytime anyone wants to link me up with great people, I immediately share those great people with the world. So I do appreciate it. And yeah, thank you both, Max and Nick, and everyone else for showing up today. It was fun. I suspect we'll be thinking for the next 7 days solid before next Sunday. Everyone's going to have a presentation available like Nick did.
Oh, that wasn't a presentation. I'm trying to avoid the murder by PowerPoint or death by PowerPoint problem. So,
dude, I was liking it. I just loved the whole day today. Everything from Max starting from you, Debbie coming in, it was all just really quite enjoyable. All sorts of beautiful words said by Jeremy, and Wade chimed in very early which is always just like a pleasure and a privilege to hear his voice on a Sunday morning in my ears. I always, there is a vibration from Wade's voice that I can say does create a calming effect. I can say that with 100% truth. So thanks, Wade. Thanks, everybody.
He has a voice made for radio. I have a face made for radio. So, all right, y'all. Thank you so much. I hope to chat again soon.
Bye, guys.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks, guys.
Yes, thank you, Marcus. Really good session.
Yeah, we're gonna do it again next week for sure. So let's all come back next week, and I'll see you then.
Peace, y'all.
Peace out.
Everybody.